Hi, my name is Gurmeet Manku. In this presentation, I'm sharing dietary guidelines by 30 organizations which have inspired me to adopt whole food plant-based guidelines. Okay, so these are the 30 organizations. I will walk us through how they have inspired me, what do they say, and let's start with medical organizations. So the food system I follow is recommended by American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and they encourage a whole food plant-based that looks like this. Half the food plate visually is fruits and vegetables. The rest of the half is calorie-dense plant foods. A quarter of it is whole grains. A quarter of it is what they call plant proteins, which is beans or beans, peas, lentils, or beans, peas, legumes. We can also call them pulses, and a few nuts and seeds, and herbs and spices at the bottom, and B12. And drink water is the beverage. Okay, so what is ACLM? Well, it came into being in 2004, and that's why it's relatively new, and many doctors may not know it exists, but it's actually a specialization within mainstream medicine in USA. So what does that mean? So today, as a doctor, we can get a double board certification to practice lifestyle medicine, just like we get a certification to practice cardiology or rheumatology or endocrinology, like that. Okay, non-doctors cannot get this. So all I'm saying is, this is not fringe medicine, this is not alternative medicine, this is mainstream medicine in USA. Okay, so I follow something specific. I follow a low-fat whole food plant-based guideline. So by low-fat, I mean a total fat intake 10-12%, even less if possible. So what has inspired me? So I will cover that in a separate video. But I'm inspired by these interventional studies by Ornish, Esselstyn, Barnard on metabolic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and also epidemiological studies. The similar food plates, not exactly this, but similar food plates were followed by many cultures, and they had very low NCD rates, non-communicable diseases. So many of them are summarized in Professor T. Colin Campbell's work. And the third step was, recently I came across Dr. Peter Rogers' videos, and I was blown away. He's amazing. So his pathophysiology and toxicology lectures convinced me of the value of the low-fat guideline. I actually did not know this guideline for many years. I adopted whole food plant-based way back in 2012, and I realized how valuable this guideline is around 2020, 2021, in that time frame. Okay. So just to assure some of my friends and my loved ones, my family, that a low-fat guideline is not unheard of, I'm just showing you one piece of evidence from epidemiology. There is something called the Okinawan diet. In the world, we have blue zones. So blue zones by Dan Buettner are populations with longevity and good lifespan and good health span. By lifespan is when they live very long. They have a lot of people exceeding 100 age, and they also have good health span, which means they don't have too much sickness. Okay, so Okinawans is one of them, and way back in 1949, this is a classic citation that compares the Okinawan diet with the Japanese diet in 1950. They had 6% total fat intake, and Japan, which also had pretty low disease rates, they were revered for having lifespan, health span, they were eating 8% fat. Okay, but the Okinawans had better health statistics. So I'm just showing you one example that it's not that unusual to have 10% total fat intake. Okay, I'll cover more details in a separate video. So let's now study one more organization, Plant-Based Health Professionals. This is basically the equivalent of ACLM in UK. Okay, they advocate the same thing. An organization called PCRM, it's a Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So this was set up in 1985 by Dr. Neil Barnard. He's one of the luminaries in the whole food plant-based movement. And this is you can say, an old organization. It has thousands of doctors as members. And they came up with this food plate many years ago. Okay, it's almost identical to that ACLM food plate. It's basically the same. Let's walk you through a few more organizations. Okay, so even these organizations have inspired me to follow whole food plant-based guidelines. Let's see how. Okay, so I'm comparing USDA food guide with Canadian food guide with the ACLM food plate. Okay, so notice the commonality. Okay, it's assuring to see that half of the food plate in all three food plates is actually fruits and vegetables. So that helped me understand that everybody believes fruits and vegetables are very important and to be eaten in abundance. Okay, so 1/4 of the food plate in all three is actually grains. Approximately a quadrant, 1/4 approximately is grains. It's whole grains in the Canadian food guide, whole grains in the ACLM food guide. Now look at the beverage. The beverage is dairy. The beverage is water in the Canadian food guide and is water in ACLM also. So what is different? What is different is, the beverage changed, but also the protein section is slightly different. So let's go through the protein section. Okay, but study the commonality. Okay, there are so many things in common also. So in USDA food plate, they have 3 eating patterns. Okay, one of them is what they call the healthy vegetarian eating pattern. Now, they don't say one is preferred over the other. They leave it as a choice to us. So a person like me chooses to follow a healthy vegetarian eating pattern. Within that pattern, the protein can be derived from plant sources, like they give examples like soy products or beans, peas, lentils, or nuts and seeds. And whole grains also have protein. That's a point that many people don't recognize. So I made a separate video titled, Do Whole Grains Have Protein? And I explain how much protein actually comes from whole grains. Very surprising, but it's insightful, that video. Anyways, so dairy, according to them, we may choose to get fortified soy versions for the beverage. Now, if we make these 2 choices, which is for the protein, we derive from plants only, and from dairy, for the dairy part, we say plants only, then the whole food plate with these 5 components becomes plant only. So all I'm saying is, within the USDA recommendations, there is a provision for choosing a plant only food plate if we feel like. Now, it's not a very prominent part of the guideline. Many people don't know this, but it's there. I'm just pointing it out. Okay, that also gives me confidence that I'm doing something right by choosing a plant-only food plate. Now, this is the Canadian food guide. It visually looks like this. They have water here, and 1/4 of it is what they call protein foods. But they have some text. Okay, this text is, choose protein foods that come from plants more often. Okay, so they have kind of a preference for plants for the protein section. They're not saying make it plant only, and they're not even saying percentage-wise how much. But if you look at the visual food plate, to me it looks like half of this protein section is meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And look at the dairy part. To me, visually, it's comparable to the 1/4 of an egg. It's kind of small. Now look at the plant foods. 1/2 of the protein section looks like it's beans, peas, lentils, or beans, peas, legumes, or what are they called, pulses, and some nuts and seeds. Okay. Now let's look at all 3. So ACLM basically says plant only. That's the only change. And Canadian Food Guide was saying choose proteins from plants more often. And within the US system, there is a healthy vegetarian pattern within which we can make it plant only by choosing protein section and dairy section from plants if we feel like. So do you see what is common and what's going on? Okay, so let's look at a few more nutrition organizations. So there is something called Academy of Nutritionists and Dietetics. It's pretty old, from 1917 onwards. It has 100,000 members. It's in USA. And they write position papers. So the earliest one I could find goes back to 2009. Maybe they have something earlier, but I'm not sure. But at least 2009 onwards, and they keep revising these position papers. This is the one. For example, 2016 is this one. And the thing I want to highlight is, these diets are appropriate for all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, older adulthood, and for athletes. The reason I'm highlighting this is, sometimes my friends ask me, is it okay to adopt a food system with just plants and no animal products if I'm pregnant, or if I'm breastfeeding, or if I am an athlete, or if I have some health condition, or if I'm old, if I'm young, if I'm middle-aged? A lot of these concerns emerge. And this kind of a publication assures us that looks like they have been studied, and it gives me assurance that, yeah, it's a well-studied system, and, you can read it. It's a adequately planned, appropriately planned vegetarian, including vegan diets, which is basically whole food plant-based guidelines are just fine. That's what I interpret these as. Dietitians of Canada, sometimes they have joint statements with the American Dietetic Association. For example, this is 2003 position paper, and they say something similar, okay, right here. British Dietetic Association, 2017 onwards, they say things like vegan diet can support healthy living in people of all ages, okay? And somewhere they also mention it can be enjoyed by children and adults, including during pregnancy and breastfeeding. Okay, that's assuring to know for me that this is okay. Now they also have this sustainability efforts. It's called One Blue Dot. What is One Blue Dot? If you go to space and we look at the planets and whatever we can see, then the Earth looks like a one blue dot. Okay, that gives us perspective. It's a precious place, in the grand scheme of things. So we should sustain it, because that's the only place we have to live. So that's the One Blue Dot initiative. And see what they say here in this PDF. completely plant-based or vegan diets need just 1/3 of the fertile land, fresh water, and energy of the typical British meat and dairy-based diet. So they are helping people move towards plant-based. Okay. There is more interesting details here if somebody wants to see. Let's go back to some more medical organizations. Okay, Kaiser Permanente, 2013, they wrote this paper, Nutritional Update for Physicians, in their own journal called Permanente Journal. Kaiser Permanente, most of my friends come to know of it through insurance, health insurance. It's one of the big health insurance carriers, providers. 200,000 employees, insures over 4 million individuals. They actually have their own journal also. They have their own doctors also. So it's kind of a big organization. So that's why it's a landmark article that such a big organization actually said plant-based diet is okay. This is 2013. And then if you go to the website, they have PDFs and booklets explaining how to adopt plant-based diet. And in 2016, they have this nice paper. It's worth browsing through if somebody is interested. It's called Plant-Based Diets, a Physician's Guide. Let's look at this text from the 2013 paper. They say physicians should consider recommending a plant-based diet to all their patients, especially those with high BP, high blood pressure, which is also like hypertension, diabetes, okay, including people with diabetes, cardiovascular disease or obesity. It's essentially all famous metabolic conditions. And they say especially those, okay, just note the verbiage, how they are positioning it, okay. American Medical Association, this is again a landmark event, 2017, they adopted a resolution. Now, what did they say? They said US hospitals should really make, plant-based meals in all hospitals. Okay, so it's amazing. Now, interestingly, 2020, AMA, American Medical Association, they actually requested the Dietary Guidelines Committee. Okay, so what is this Dietary Guidelines for the Americans Committee? It's called DGAC. So what's going on is, in USA, the dietary guidelines are figured out every 5 years. So there is a scientific committee which writes big reports, and then that report goes to a smaller committee which finalizes the report, and those are the guidelines. So as I showed you, it's possible to make a plant-only food plate, but a lot of people don't know it. Okay, so they wrote a letter in 2020 that clearly indicate that meat and dairy products are optional. So all they're saying is just make it obvious. A lot of people don't know this. Just make it obvious. That's all they're requesting to do. I just thought it's interesting that AMA is requesting DGAC that this be done. Okay. Now this is National Association for the Advocacy for Colored People. So just after AMA said that, okay, AMA is saying this plant-based meal should be available in all hospitals, they said, why just hospitals? We want them in schools and prisons also. And what do they want? Well, plant-based meal options, 100% plant-based meal program. Okay, amazing. Okay, this is 2019. Let's look at a few government organizations. Now, since AMA said we would like all US hospitals to have these meals, we need some legislation and some infrastructure and logistics in place to actually make it happen in different states. So a few states responded. California said, yes, we want these meals in hospitals. New York hospitals responded. Oregon responded. Now, my guess is that over the next 20 years, more and more states will start having such options, and over time, some data will collect. How do we make this happen? What should the menu look like? They will do some studies. Was it beneficial? Was it cost effective? So as more and more data accumulates, more and more states and more hospitals and establishments are likely to get you can say inspired to do this. Okay. California allocated $700 million for getting plant-based meals to schools. Okay, you can pause the video and see the details. It's a pretty landmark event, and it's a fair amount of budget, $700 million. Okay. Interestingly, here is one more government organization, which brings me personal joy. There is something called Nature Cure or Naturopathy in India. Okay, it's protected and promoted by the Ayush Ministry within the government of India, which protects multiple healing systems. And Nature Cure Naturopathy is one such ancient healing system, and it has many aspects to it. There's a dietary aspect. The dietary aspect is what brings me joy because it's centered around something called Kandamul Phalpul Patipani, which is a way of saying fruits and vegetables, different types, plus grains and beans, plus a few nuts and seeds, and some herbs and spices. So what is going on here? Okay, so what is Kandamul Phalpul Patipani? I have come to understand that in the past, and some people seem to do it even today, there's a tradition of, the saintly people, people who have spiritual pursuits, saints and sages. They live away from hamlets and villages and cities, and they used to pursue meditation, for example. Now, those people are peaceful forest dwellers, and they do not go and kill animals or birds and reptiles and snakes and insects. That's not what they do. They subsist on plants only. But what do they eat? And is that a complete food system? From, let's say, the Western nutrition perspective, we can question, does it have all micronutrients? I was amazed. I learned all this in the last 2-3 years. Yes, it does. So there are raw foodists in USA, and I found doctors Rick and Karen Dina. If somebody wants to understand how to assemble food plates like this, very difficult food system. We don't have enough Western science around this, but it's possible. I haven't done this. I'm inspired by it. I'm trying to go there, but I haven't done it myself. But I was blown away that it is possible. But we don't have to subsist on just kandamul, phalful, patipani. We don't have to subsist only on fruits and vegetables. We can eat grains and beans too. These are additional plant foods. So a peaceful forest dweller kind of a person can eat grains and beans too. We can eat nuts and seeds, more plant foods now, and more herbs and spices. Okay. Now, this food system starts coinciding with whole food plant-based guidelines. Okay. The food groups are identical. Okay. Let me go back a little. Kandamul, what does kandamul mean? This is root vegetables, and kand refers to the starch-rich tubers like potatoes and sweet potatoes and yams. Potatoes are also can be considered kand. Mool is the root vegetables which are not as sweet. It's radishes, carrots, beets. That one. Phalful is, my interpretation is, this is basically fruits and vegetables. Patti pani is leafy greens and water. Okay, so this is the food system. Okay, so Naturopathy Day in India is actually 18 November in memory of something Mahatma Gandhi did. He was a big fan of Nature Cure Naturopathy. So he founded the All India Nature Cure Foundation. Okay, so one of my cherished, something that brings me joy is to see all these interconnections between an ancient healing system, which very, very few people know about, and the modern American College of Lifestyle Medicine's whole food plant-based food plate. They have so much in common. Okay, it's elegant and insightful, and I will just show you in a moment. It is a high fiber diet. It is also anti-inflammatory. It is anti-cancer, heart healthy. I will just build this story in a moment for you. But it just brings me joy to see these two things. And unfortunately, most people don't know that we have this ancient tradition called Nature Cure or Naturopathy, and Gandhi used to follow it. And it's part of this Ayush ministry. They protect it. It's a healing system. I just wish more people knew about Nature Cure Naturopathy. How is it done? What do you do? And we can see it in two ways: the Western perspective, the Indian perspective. Okay, it's elegant. Okay, and if somebody wants to just get started, there are some YouTube videos by multiple doctors and practitioners. You can check them out. Okay. Cancer organizations. Let's see what they advocate and how I got convinced that I'm on the right track, that I'm doing something sensible with the low-fat, whole-food, plant-based guidelines. So let me share this with you. We have an organization in USA called AICR, American Institute for Cancer Research. So they actually have this infographic. It's called AICR Foods That Fight Cancer. So when I looked at this, I was blown away. Okay, what did I see? One picture has whole grains, different whole grains, just a single picture, but they show different ones. Then they have two pictures of beans. So these are beans, peas, lentils, or beans, peas, legumes, or pulses, colorful ones. And one of them has been carved out as special. It's soy. Then we have nuts and seeds, and one of them has been carved out as special, flaxseed. And then they have two beverages. They show some teas here. They show some coffee. Okay, out of all the stuff listed here, I don't drink coffee, but they're listing it here. 19 pictures are fruits and vegetables, colorful ones. Okay, and I could see leafy greens. Amazing. Dr. Greger, who is a whole food plant-based luminary, he tells us leafy greens are the best veggies. Okay, I see cruciferous veggies. I see two pictures here. Maybe there's one more. I see some berries. I see the allium family and colorful fruits. Amazing. Okay. Now, what do I not see? I was surprised. Herbs and spices are not listed, and mushrooms are not listed. Both of them are known to be kind of anti-inflammatory, rich in antioxidants, so they should also be cancer protective. Maybe the degree of evidence was not enough. what I see is also the following. There is no animal foods listed here. There is no meat, no fish, no eggs, no milk is in this picture. There is no dairy products. So we don't have milk derivatives like ghee, butter, cream, cheese, khoya, mawa, buttermilk, chas. None of those is listed here. Okay, we don't have macronutrient extracts listed here. So macronutrients are, for example, fats are macronutrients, carbohydrates are macronutrients. So oils are fat extracts, sugars are carbohydrate extracts. None of them is listed here, and they haven't listed any processed foods either. So when I see what they are showing, to me it looks like the whole food plant-based food plate. Now they haven't shown the relative ratios, but the food groups and what they're listing looks identical to this. Okay, I just thought it's interesting to see these interconnections. Okay, now once again, the left hand side of this food plate is what I'm calling kandamul phalphul patipani, which is fruits and vegetables, which are low calorie density, which means they are water rich, And on the right hand side, we see high calorie density plant foods. They are whole grains, beans, peas, lentils, beans, peas, legumes, and plus nuts and seeds. So kind of the right hand side is like dal chawal, where chawal does not mean white rice, it means brown rice, but chawal can be replaced by any other whole grain like millets or jowar, bajra, sorghum, many of them. Okay, so it's kind of like dal chawal. In India, this is a North Indian term, grains, beans plus beans combined. On the left hand side is a salad with all these interesting rainbow colored fruits and vegetables. So we can conceptualize the whole food plate this way. It is dal chawal, any whole grain plus any beans combined, somehow prepared, and a salad. And you put herbs and spices to make it amazingly tasty. And we can put lime, lemon, vinegar and stuff. Okay, all right. So let's see. Does AICR actually encourage that we make like an entire food plate like that? So here is, just to reinforce the point, they also have infographics like this. 10 points. How to prevent cancer. What are the recommendations? 6 of these have to do with, things that we put in our mouth. And 5 out of these 6 have to do with, reduce, attenuate, like don't eat something, something like that. Okay. And one of them is positive, which says, eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans. One concern I have is that, the stuff that they're saying, reduce, limit, I really wish they had used a stronger vocabulary, especially because 2 of the things listed here, like alcohol and processed meat, these are IARC Group 1 carcinogens. Now, what is IARC Group 1 carcinogen? So IARC is an organization within WHO. Their goal in life is, they have a long list of potential carcinogens, and they keep assessing every once in a while what is the degree of evidence. Do we have sufficient evidence in humans? And is causality being established? So once these 2 things are done, they say, okay, now we understand this potential carcinogen is really a true carcinogen and it's placed in group 1. Like, we are done. There's nothing else to prove. So 2 of them, alcohol, I think this is 1985, and processed meat, if I remember correctly, this is 2015. They are IARC Group 1 carcinogens. Okay, so for these substances, at least, we should not say even eat a little bit. We should really use strong vocabulary. Don't touch them. Okay, and I really wish they could say, don't touch any of this, minimize it to 0 or something. I feel the vocabulary is not strong enough. Okay, now let's come back. This is AICR once again. And they have this concept called 1/3, 2/3 plate. What does it mean? So they have visual plates like this, in which they will say 1/3 or less of the food plate could be animal protein, and the rest of the food plate, which is 2/3 or more, is vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. And apparently it goes back in time to 2000, maybe earlier, I don't know. Now the interesting part is 1/3 or less. Look at the or less part. Okay, so we may choose to make it less if we feel like, and there's an encouragement to go more plants. Okay, let's see this. So there is an article called New American Plate, which has these pictures. Okay, they say this is the old American plate, and they encourage us to eat less meat, more plant, less meat, more plant. Go towards the New American Plate, which is the 1/3, 2/3 concept. But amazingly, in the same article, they have a stage 4. They have this visual food plate, which has this name called another option. Okay, what is this? Let's look at these 3 sentences. In a one-pot meal, they say, like the stir fry, we can reduce the animal foods and increase the plant-based ingredients without even noticing. Why do they say without even noticing? Because many of us notice that so few so few animal foods and such a preponderance of plant foods. Is that okay? Many people are not agreeable with such a food plate. But they're saying we can make it very tasty and flavorful. You may not notice it. Now, why are they saying do this? Okay, second sentence. This plate is bursting with colorful vegetables, hearty whole grains, cancer-fighting vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. So the cancer protective stuff is the plant foods. Okay, look at the reasoning. They say vitamin, mineral, phytochemicals. Okay, and if you go back, here also they kind of say minerals, vitamins, phytochemicals. This stuff is full of that stuff. Okay, this is the previous picture I showed you. Okay, now what is the role of animal foods? Fish, poultry, or occasional red meat is used as a complement, adding a bit of flavor and extra substance to the meal. So that is the role of animal products. So after I see all this, I feel assured that I'm on the right track, having chosen whole food plant-based guidelines. Okay, they seem to be in harmony with what AICR, American Institute for Cancer Research, is teaching us. Okay. Let's look at ACS, American Cancer Society. Now, it's the same set of scientists which kind of are at different cancer organizations. Okay, they're all interconnected. They all know each other. So ACS also has similar guidelines, just that the infographic looks different. If you read it carefully, they will say more fruits and vegetables. And they're talking about whole grains. And they have a couple of examples. They will say fiber-rich food, for example, beans and peas. So do you see what's going on? Fruits and vegetables, beans and peas and whole grains, that's basically whole food plant-based guidelines, if you remember the picture. Okay, and then they have other details like, colorful variety is helpful. So medley of rainbow-colored fruits and vegetables. And then you see what's going on. Then they say less junk, okay, and they have some examples listed here. So the good thing I like is, visually, they say check mark and cross. So psychologically, to me, it sends a message, okay, I may choose to not have it at all. So to me, this is a stronger way of messaging than the verbal messaging that AICR had. And they have an alcohol guideline also. Just like the AICR guideline, they say, just cut it out. Okay, you can read the details if you feel like. It says best not to drink alcohol. Okay. Interestingly, I learned that ACS, American Cancer Society, way back in 1996, has guidelines like this. In publications like this, guidelines on diet, nutrition, and cancer prevention. Okay, and who's writing this? ACS 1996 Advisory Committee on Diet, Nutrition, and Cancer. Okay, so this is set up. This is written by ACS Dietary Committee. What do they say? Look at this. The first bullet is all plants. Okay, what are they saying? Way back in 96, they talk about fruits and vegetables. And then they talk about grains, pasta, beans. So you see what's going on? And they emphasize this guideline number 2 is choose foods low in fat. So there's some directionality being given to us that, we should eat less fat than what most people are eating. That's the direction to go. Okay, so I find this assuring that there's a consistent messaging going on for at least 30 years by ACS. Okay, so this is ECAC, European Commission Against Cancer. What do they teach us? Now they have multiple guidelines for cancer prevention. There's a dietary aspect to it, and the dietary aspect is eat plenty of whole grains, pulses, vegetables, and fruits. Now this word pulses means beans, peas, legumes, or beans, peas, lentils, right? And some people just call them beans. These are all the same concept. Okay, let's go to heart disease organizations. Interesting. Okay, so I'll tell you something interesting. Dr. Dean Ornish is one of the whole food plant-based luminaries. He's kind of a legend in this, and so is Dr. Esselstyn, and so are a few others. Let's come back to Dean Ornish. Now, in 1990, he wrote this landmark paper, okay, which demonstrated reduction, which is reversal in coronary artery blockages after 1 year with lifestyle changes alone. Okay, now this is a landmark event. Reduction or reversal in atherosclerosis is unheard of, right? It's a very respectable thing to accomplish with lifestyle changes alone. Now, if you go back to his biography, he was actually inspired by Swami Satchidananda, and there's a YouTube video in which he is really respectful, and he fondly remembers his teacher, Swami Satchidananda. I'm having a hard time pronouncing his name. Okay, now he had 3 interventions. One was dietary, like a 10% low-fat vegetarian food plate. Then he used to ask people to walk around, do a little bit of yoga and stuff. Then he also emphasized the stress management part. Later on, Esselstyn came around and said, well, we can drop the stress management part and we can just focus on the dietary changes. That is all he emphasized. He tightened the knobs and he got excellent results. And I'll come to that in a moment, but let's come back to Dean Ornish first. He has this landmark study in 1990, and then 2010, Medicare actually started covering the Ornish lifestyle program. Another landmark event, okay, 2010. So you can find him online by searching for Ornish lifestyle program. Now, a publication by ACC and AHA. So ACC is American College of Cardiology. AHA is American Heart Association. So again, what is this publication? Guidelines on the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease. Okay. Primary prevention means if you're trying to avoid the first ever heart attack. Okay. So they say two systems are okay. Plant-based is okay and Mediterranean diet is okay. So in the sentences they have combined the two, but I'm just pointing out plant-based and Mediterranean diets were checkmarked as okay. Now now I'll show you the 2021 guideline, but I just want to refresh our memory of these 3 food plates I showed you. You know, the USDA Canadian Food Guide, ACLM guide, and you know how half the food plate is common, fruits and vegetables, there is whole grains, there is protein section that we are debating, and there is a dairy section that we are debating, the beverage section. Okay, in that context, now see, AHA published a dietary guidelines in 2021 in a PDF file. Okay, now what do they say? Point 2 is eat plenty of fruits and vegetables. So they're saying fruits and vegetables. Point 3 is choose foods made mostly with whole grains rather than refined grains. Whole grains, remember? Now comes the interesting part. Choose healthy sources of protein. Okay, but look at the verbiage. What do they say? 4A says mostly protein from plants. And they give examples, legumes and nuts. Do you see what's going on? Do you see the connections with these food plates here? And now comes the interesting one which caught my attention. 4D says if meat or poultry is desired, then choose lean cuts and avoid processed forms. And I personally find the if quite significant because guideline number 9 has an if in 2 places. Let's just read it. If you do not drink alcohol, do not start. If you choose to drink alcohol, then limit the intake. So why is this if significant? You know, they have left it to us. If you choose to do it, then take care. I mean, that's the kind of sentences I'm seeing here. So in some sense, they are not saying, please do it. They're not insisting upon it. There's an if, which introduces a measure of optionality in it. Do you see the subtlety here? That's what I'm seeing. Maybe you see something else. But at the very least, they are saying mostly protein from plants. Okay, they are also saying eat mostly plants. Okay, let's look at diabetes organizations. So this is American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. Okay, who are these people? Well, every once in a while they write these big manuals about what? Clinical practice guidelines for the diabetes mellitus comprehensive care plan. Okay, and then things like this. Consensus statement by AACE, and there's a sister organization called ACE, American College of Endocrinology, on how to manage diabetes, right? A 2020 executive summary. So in publications like these, you know, there is like a table 8 in this publication, the first one I mentioned, and what should patients with diabetes do? They say consume plant-based diet. Okay. One thing I want to mention is, if you talk about the word plant-based diet in marketing, or if you're just talking to somebody, it can mean many things to many people. Okay, even vegetarians can start thinking, I am plant-based because a lot of my food plate is plant-based. Now they may be eating a lot of processed foods, and they may be eating oils and sugars which are derivatives. They are not whole plant foods, and vegetarians may be eating a fair amount of dairy, but they can imagine I'm plant-based. Now in medical circles, you know, they typically have citations. What do they mean by plant-based? The citations will refer to classic studies or the position statements or meta-analysis and some kind of a respected publication which has demonstrated that whole food plant-based guidelines. So that's different. It's very important to understand what plant-based means in technical publications and what plant-based might mean in like a non-technical publication in marketing terms or something. Okay, I just want to make it clear. I thought I'll mention that. Okay, now this is a technical publication. A plant-based diet has a technical meaning here. Okay, American Diabetes Association. This is like the Diabetes Association in USA, right? They actually approved of 3 different diets. So one is Mediterranean, one is DASH, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and the third one is plant-based diets. So the interesting thing is, I learned this from a Dr. Greger video. Dr. Greger is a whole food plant-based luminary, and he mentioned that DASH diet has an interesting history. What is the history? Well, DASH is dietary approaches to stop hypertension. Okay, it was developed by a doctor called Dr. Frank Sachs. Okay, now Dr. Frank Sachs did a bunch of studies, and he realized that increasing plant foods is what helps hypertension, and a reduction in sodium, salt will also help. But his whole theme was plant amplification helps. So after doing some studies, he said, okay, what is the overall food system? Like, what should we tell people to do? What does the diet look like? So he, in his original publication, kind of conceded that the data seems to point towards plants. But, we need to introduce animal products for palatability. Okay, that's what I learned from a Dr. Greger video. Interesting. Now, historically, if Frank Sachs had devised two diets, like a DASH diet with animal foods and you can say a DASH plus or DASH plants only or something, if he had two versions of it, it's possible that this diet, which was plant only, might have made its way into other food guidelines earlier than 2017, because DASH diet is many years old. Okay, I'm just saying historically it's an interesting thing to observe. Okay. Now remember, ADA is not saying one is better than the other. They have just approved 3 of them, and that's good enough for me. Plant-based diet is okayed by ADA. I'm satisfied with that. Okay. Canadian Dietary Association, they have this article from 2016. What is this? A comprehensive review of the literature supporting recommendations from the Canadian Diabetes Association for the use of a plant-based diet for management of type 2 diabetes. This 2016. Since 2016, additional meta reviews and there's an ACLM position statement on diabetes. Much more literature has accumulated, and I think people are studying it further. So you can look at more recent publications too if you really want to understand what is the state of diabetes and plant-based guidelines. But this is interesting. 2016, Canadian Dietary Association started saying this, right? Now, in this paper, they say public awareness is lacking. Like 90% of patients don't even know that this is an option, that Canadian Diabetes Association says is an option. And doctors mistakenly seem to believe that patients are unlikely to adhere to whole food plant-based. These are a couple of points mentioned in this video by Dr. Greger, through which I learned that Canadian Diabetes Association has okayed plant-based diet for type 2 diabetes. Okay. Interesting. Kidney International. Okay. So what is this one? 2020 Clinical Practice Guideline for Diabetes Management in Chronic Kidney Disease by Kidney International. So nutrition intake, there's a section like this. What do they say? Patients with diabetes and CKD is chronic kidney disease, should consume an individualized diet high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fiber, legumes, plant-based proteins, unsaturated fats. And when I see this, to me it looks like they're saying eat whole food plant-based guidelines by ACLM. That's what my interpretation is. Okay. Here's a small nuance. Okay. They're saying patients with diabetes and CKD. Now, many times, diabetes comes first and CKD comes later. So if you just have diabetes but not CKD, should we wait for CKD to come and then adopt this? Not really, right? We can get inspiration from Canadian Diabetes Association and American Diabetes Association, as I showed you, right? We could adopt it with or without chronic kidney disease. Okay. So what I like about this publication is that they have this cute infographic, and they mention where plant protein comes from. They mention beans, peas, lentils, nuts and seeds, whole grains. Proteins come from whole grain, also a fact that is not very commonly known. And there are some starchy veggies. They can come from the fruits and vegetables section of the plate also, if we eat that in abundance. Okay, there are all these details. But what I like is that they have shown we can serve our food in a plate or a rice bowl or a banana leaf or an injera. Injera is made of teff. This is like a tortilla or a fermented bread. We can call it flat bread if you want. This is a tortilla made of corn. So we can serve our food in any of these. So this is like an international view of assembling our food plates, which is something I like. Okay, let's look at defense organizations. Wow. So now the reason I'm pointing out that we should study defense organizations is many of us have this genuine concern that if I have a food plate in which I don't eat meat, fish, eggs, milk, and dairy products, what does this mean? There is no milk in this, and there is no milk derivatives also. So there is no ghee, there is no paneer, there is no cheese, there is no cream, there is no khoya, mawa, there is no 2% milk, fat-free milk. There's none of that. So if I make a food plate like this, will my bone density go down? Am I like just withering into oblivion? That's the concern many people have. How about my muscles? Will I lose muscles? If I don't have, can I build muscles? Can I get stronger bones? So genuine concerns exist, right? These are serious questions. So that's why I have 2-3 agencies here. I learned about Defense Health Agency. Okay. So what is Defense Health Agency? So this is the organization whose objective is to ensure that US defense, like Army, Navy, Air Force, and everybody is in good shape, like very fit, like fit soldiers. Okay, so that is their objective, that is their goal. And I learned through this interview with James Wykes. Who is James Wykes? Now, he is the co-producer, and he also stars in a documentary called Game Changers 2019. It's a really good documentary. I loved it because it shows fit people, athletes who are setting international records, world-class records, who have adopted plant-based guidelines, okay, for their food. So James Wykes himself is super fit, and he's a fitness instructor. I mean, he's a combatant martial artist. So he teaches not just ordinary people, he teaches combatants. Okay. Now, in this interview, he says that the film was the first documentary ever to be accredited by DHA, Defense Health Agency. Okay. So that healthcare members could get certified medical education credits, CMEs. Okay, what is all this stuff? By watching the film and listening to a panel that we gave. Okay, so what's going on is, let me show you. So I did some Google searches. I said, is this all true? It turns out we have some web pages which show up. Yes, it's true. Now, in USA, when we have a license to practice medicine, healthcare professionals, we also have to keep educating ourselves year by year because new knowledge comes in. So those are called continuing education credits, okay? Or we can also call them continuing medical education credits. So in 2019, watching this movie followed by a quiz was equivalent to 2 continuing education credits. Okay, very interesting. You can click on this link and see it. Now, 2021 onwards, within the DHA, we have lifestyle medicine certified doctors, and they have started teaching people about lifestyle medicine, their support staff, and so look at this, practical tips for implementing a whole food plant-based diet, home study. Okay, it's pretty amazing. I also learned through the same interview that Special Ops Medical Association, SOMA, they also endorsed the film and plant-based eating. So I tried to Google and tried to find out. I couldn't find a web page, but in this interview, he mentions this. Let's look at one more. Israel Defense Forces. Okay, who are these people? These are Israel, I mean, the soldiers. Okay, it turns out Israel has a lot of vegans. Okay, and the soldiers are also vegan to a very large percentage. 1 in 18 declared themselves vegan. So the Israeli army, they actually support veganism by providing them meals. There is actually IDF YouTube channel, and there's a 1-minute video, IDF, the most vegan army in the world, by IDF themselves. Okay, and they're celebrating veganism. It's pretty amazing, right? So think about it. If there was a concern that a food system without meat, without fish, without eggs, without milk, and without dairy products made us weak, then why would these defense agencies allow it? Okay, that's all I'm trying to say here. Okay, let's go through a bunch of other organizations. So now this person is not an organization, but he's a legend. He's Dr. Benjamin Spock. There's this book called Dr. Spock's Baby and Child Care, which has gone through multiple editions. It's a highly sold book, and anybody who gets like pregnant and has started having babies in USA, many people start buying his book. His book is very thick. I don't know who reads his books because when somebody gets pregnant and they're having babies and raising kids, people usually don't have time to go and read these thick books. But the book exists and many people buy it. Now the amazing thing is Dr. Spock himself fell sick when he got older, and luckily he came in touch with Dr. Neil Barnard, and he came in touch with his organization PCRM, and he touched base with other doctors. He adopted these guidelines and he himself experienced the benefits. Then he learned more about nutrition, and then he said it makes sense. So in the last edition that he contributed to, which is like the 7th edition was published, I think a few weeks after he died. So in that edition, a low-fat plant-based diet is actually encouraged. Okay, and for kids, interesting. I just for fun, I said, let's go to WHO guidelines. What do they say? What are we supposed to eat? So I copied the text right here. The very first guideline says fruit, vegetable, legumes, nuts and seeds, or nuts and whole grains. Okay, and then there's more details. But what is the guideline? What is the main guideline? I thought it's just curious and interesting, fascinating to see what is the WHO guideline, healthy diet for adults. Okay. Whole Foods, interesting. This is not a medical organization. This is not a government organization, but this is a company, a very large company in USA. Recently, Amazon bought this company, but this was set up around 1980s, 1982 perhaps, I forgot, by John Mackey, who is a long-term whole food plant-based advocate. In fact, he has written books like this. Okay. So Whole Foods has an official diet in their website, and they have Engine 2 diet compliant products. What is Engine 2 diet? It's a whole food plant-based system by Rip Esselstyn. Okay, who's Rip Esselstyn? He's actually very fit. He used to compete in triathlons, I believe. Then he became a firefighter, and then he started advocating the Engine 2 diet. So he has an interesting life story. He is the son of Dr. Esselstyn, the heart surgeon who has developed amazing whole food plant-based guidelines. So I just thought I'll tell you the Whole Foods official diet is Engine 2 diet, and the founder is a staunch advocate and long-term advocate of whole food plant-based guidelines. And now he started a new company. I forgot the name. I think it's Love Life Health. I forgot. And he's bringing together doctors and meals together in a format that more and more people could adopt these guidelines. That's his latest company. Okay. Amazing. 1948, way back, this National Health Association was set up in USA. They have been advocating strict whole food plant-based guidelines way back in 1948, and they're strict about salt also, no salt. It's pretty amazing. Okay, now it took a lot of studies that enough evidence could be collected that major healthcare organizations could start saying, yep, now we understand the food system makes sense. But look at this, when there was hardly any evidence, way back in 48, they said this. They still exist, and they have very good recipes if somebody wants to go. It's a very good section if you want to have recipes. Okay. One more example. So this is a piece of work from planetary health perspective. People are talking about the environment is changing. People are concerned the temperature might increase. So from all the environmental connections, the question is, what is a planet-friendly diet? So Lancet is a top medical journal, and an Eat Lancet commission was set up, and the goal was joint optimization. Joint means we are optimizing two objectives. Public health, we all want to be healthy. At the same time, we also want the environment to be healthy. So what should we eat collectively all over the world so that both public health, human health, and planetary health is in good shape? So this is a food plate, and the only thing I want to point out is, what is the role of animal products? It's about 1/12 of the food plate. Okay, the rest is all plants. Okay, so now let's look at some guidelines by Institute of Medicine, which is now called National Academy of Medicine in USA. This part of the presentation is a bit complex. Okay, it is all these nitty-gritty details about something called dietary cholesterol, trans fats, sat fats. So if you find this is too complex or of not much interest to you, then my request is please fast forward. In YouTube, you can jump to any offset. There's a section on gut microbiome and high fiber diet. That's much simpler and actually valuable. And then I will talk about Esselstyn's study, which brings me personal joy because it's a very important piece of work by Esselstyn. Okay. So let's go through this section. It's complex, but I'm trying to simplify as much as I can to share with you what do I do about all these three things listed here. Okay, dietary cholesterol, trans fats, and sat fats. Okay, so IOM, now the name has changed recently. Institute of Medicine has published manuals like this. These are like encyclopedia. Okay, so 1,330 page report on all micronutrients. Okay, so it's very comprehensive. Now somewhere on page 70, they say these three substances, these three constituents in our food should be as low as possible, as low as possible, as low as possible. So minimize their intake. That's the message. Why? Okay, luckily there is an explanation which I was able to understand. Page 75. Let's read it. A substantial body of evidence suggests that sat fats, trans fats, and cholesterol raise blood, total, and LDL cholesterol levels, which in turn increase risk of coronary heart disease. So basically, if we eat foods which have this stuff, my cholesterol level is likely to go up. Specifically, the LDL cholesterol is likely to go up. These increase my risk of coronary heart disease. So what is coronary heart disease? Okay, that is the one. So there is this term called atherosclerosis, in our arteries, actually throughout our arteries, not just the heart. We can start getting you can call it plaque, blockages, so narrowing and hardening of the arteries. They don't flex as well. And this whole phenomenon, there are some details which I'm skipping, might lead us to a heart attack, instant death, okay, within minutes. So I come from India, so I have seen the statistic. They are mind-boggling. India has a surprisingly high amount of heart disease, this coronary heart disease. Okay, and I am also an Asian Indian. What does Asian Indian mean? It's people of Indian origin who are in USA. We also have very high rates of heart disease, this coronary heart disease, much higher than the average US population, and many of my friends don't know this. So I don't want to drop dead due to heart attacks. I don't want to get all that pain. I really want to be in good shape, right? So that I'm around for people who depend upon me. So I really want to minimize my risk. So let's read further. It says, because there is a positive linear trend between intake of each of these fats and the risk of coronary heart disease, even very low intakes of each may increase the risk. Okay, even very low intakes. Okay, it's thus recommended that intakes of sat fats, trans fats, and cholesterol, and they're talking about dietary cholesterol coming through food, remain as low as possible. Okay, so I take it seriously because of my history. I'm from India and heart attack, and these people are saying, and you should look up what are these people who are the National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine. These are super prestigious organizations in USA. By the way, if somebody does research, who are these people who are writing these encyclopedias? Okay. So let's go through it step by step. Dietary cholesterol. Okay, the story is very simple. Okay, let's see the story instead of getting excited. So dietary cholesterol is found exclusively in animal products, and plant foods have zero dietary cholesterol. It's as simple as that. So that simplified my life. I know what I should minimize. It's very clear, right? Okay. Trans fats, a little complicated, but not that complex. It's understandable. But let's walk through it. And I would suggest we walk through it because many guidelines, talk about this term called trans fats, and we might have seen it, but we may not know what is this and how to minimize. Okay. So let me show you how I have chosen to minimize this. So here's a quick summary of trans fats. It's found in animal products and ultra-processed foods, and whole plant foods do not have any trans fats. Okay, it's a little tricky what I'm saying here. So let's go in slow motion, step by step. Okay, so it turns out we have plant foods and we have animal-derived foods. So what are plant foods? So plant foods are grains and beans, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices, that stuff in their natural form. Okay, in their natural form, what I just told you has no trans fats at all, zero trans fats. Okay, but if we start processing them, and specifically if we produce this thing called PHOs, so PHO are partially hydrogenated oils, and now these oils are used a lot in processed food industry, and they are quite pervasive. And these are called artificial fats because they are not natural. They did not occur in nature. We created them through industrial processing. Okay, in the animal products, we have natural trans fats. So they occur naturally. So what are natural animal products? So natural animal products are meat, fish, eggs, dairy. So it will be like a fresh meat, or the freshly like eggs that were laid, or milk that just came out, or fish that was just like farmed or caught. Those natural foods, plant world, they do have trans fats in them. Now if we start processing them and we add oils and stuff, then they start getting natural trans fats and artificial trans fats if we use these PHOs. Do you see what's going on? The whole point is plant foods in their natural form have zero trans fats. So a person like me who wants to minimize trans fats intakes knows what to do. I should really go after plant foods without all this artificial stuff going on, right? These partially hydrogenated oils. Luckily, there is a push in the world to phase these out, these artificial trans fats coming from plant foods. And government guidelines are getting passed in multiple countries, and I think in a few, years and maybe decades, they should go away from the world. But what about these ones? Okay. Just to fortify the point that I just made you, here is dietary guidelines for Americans. USDA publication 2005. They actually tell us what percentage is coming from these two sources. What are the two sources? Natural and artificial. And they tell you processed foods and oils, they provide approximately 80% of trans fats in the US diet. Whenever it was measured, I'll just come to that in a moment, 20% that occur naturally, these are natural trans fats, are coming from animal sources. So you see animal sources, and the rest of it is processed foods. So I said, okay, whom are they quoting? So they actually are quoting some publication from 2003. Okay, so let's go to the 2003 publication. This is the one. It's an FDA publication. And they are basing, whatever they are basing, it's on some old data from 94, 96. Okay, so that I think we should redo all these studies and see what is today's trans fat intake. But these are the numbers being quoted in multiple places, but they're insightful. Let's go through it, okay? They have all this data on all sorts of processed foods, right? What are these? Like potato chips, candy, cookies and crackers, and pies, and margarine, and shortenings. Okay, all this stuff led to about 4.6 grams. And what is this stuff? This is animal foods. These are milk, including the milk that we pour on cereal, ice cream, ice milk, total cheese and cottage cheese. Then there is beef, ground and not ground. There are frankfurters, lunch meat. There is fluid and sour cream and butter. So you see a fair amount of dairy is going on here. And then there is beef and frankfurters. Okay. So all this stuff in the US diet in 94-96, it contributed 1.2 grams. Now if you do simple math, it's like 80-20. So 20% came from animal products and 80% came from these PHOs. Okay. Now we are making attempts to phase all this, the processed food part of the trans fat story. But what about these animal products, which give us natural trans fats? Okay. So what about non-US countries, like worldwide? What is going on in the artificial versus natural trans fats? So interestingly, there is this systematic review published in Nutrients 2017. They did some estimate worldwide. They studied a bunch of countries. In some countries, data exists, and according to them, in 16 out of 21 countries, mean intakes of animal trans fat were higher than that of industrial trans fat. Okay. Now, animal sources, they have explained, were defined as milk, cheese, eggs, meat, fish, butter. Okay. So you can see if you want more details. So let's go through dietary guidelines for trans fats, because many of us hear it. Trans fats do show up here and there in whatever we read. So let's go through dietary guidelines. Okay, I just showed you IOM, Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Medicine, very prestigious organization, by the way. They say trans fatty acids should be as low as possible. And here's a summary that I shared with you earlier. Okay. This is WHO guidelines. It's a very complicated sentence, so let's do the following. Let's remove parts of the sentence. There are examples here, okay? Found where. So let's remove that and just look at the main sentence. Unsaturated fats are preferable to sat fats and trans fats of all kinds, including both industry-produced trans fats and ruminant trans fats. The ruminant trans fats are the ones coming from animal foods like the dairy and the frankfurters and what I showed you. And what do they say? Trans fats should be minimized to less than 1%. Okay, IOM said just minimize, cut it out. Every little increase is increasing risk of heart disease. So the guideline is a little weaker in some sense. They're not saying make it zero. I wish the word zero were used so that I could understand from the guideline we should make it zero if possible. But they haven't said that. But they're saying reduce it. Okay, this is USDA guidelines 2025. The national academies, the same publication I told you earlier, recommends that trans fat and dietary cholesterol consumption be as low as possible. Okay, so how to make trans fat intake zero? Now, the same IOM report actually reminds us trans fat acids are not essential, provide no known benefit. Any incremental increase in trans fatty acid increases CHD risk. Okay, now here is the interesting sentence. They say, because trans fats are unavoidable in ordinary non-vegan diets, consuming 0% of energy would require significant changes in the patterns of dietary intake. What are they saying? They're saying almost everybody is consuming meat, fish, eggs, and dairy, animal foods. So if you really want to cut down trans fat intake to zero, we basically have to become vegan. Vegan means no intake of animal foods at all. So in non-vegan diets, trans fats start trickling in. Okay, so that's what they're saying. So I choose to minimize my risk. Coming from India, I really want to show you the statistics. Indians have a lot of heart disease. Okay, my grandfather had heart disease, the maternal grandfather, and he died. He could have lived much longer. Okay, so out of the 4 grandparents, one grandparent has a heart disease. So I don't want to go in this direction of getting heart disease and suffering. So I really want to minimize my risk, and the guidelines are clear. They point in the direction of veganism, like drop animal foods, and that's what I have done. Okay, Institute of Medicine, I just showed you. We need to drop all this stuff, okay, and just focus on this for zero trans fats intake. Okay. Okay, I finished the trans fat story. Now let's come to sat fats. This is very complex. Sat fats is supremely complex, but I will cut short the story with a quick summary of what do I do. Okay, sat fats is a very complex subject. It's complex because there are so many different types of sat fats. Now, where are they found? Different foods have different, lengths of these fatty acids. Then some of them are produced in the intestines. It's just too complex. Okay, but let me just simplify the discussion as I have done. Sat fats we want to be as low as possible. Now the problem is they are found in both animal products and plant foods. I'll go into some details in a moment. My strategy to minimize it is to go for a low fat. A total fat intake has become very low for me. I'll tell you in a moment why. With a low fat strategy, my sat fat intake also becomes low. So that is what I can do, and that's my strategy. Okay, let's go into a little more detail. WHO guidelines, they tell us, again, I just showed you, unsaturated fats are preferable to sat fats, okay? And they're encouraging us to reduce sat fat, and they're saying reduce it to less than 10% of total energy intake. So it's a directionality, minimize it. Again, USDA guidelines, as I showed you earlier, sat fats should be limited to less than 10% of calories, okay? And what is American Heart Association guidelines? Now, this, WHO is world level. USDA is at the level of USA, a specific country. Now, AHA is, you can say, disease specific, or, it's about heart health. So it's a very specific organization. Now, they are saying for heart health, it should be even lower than the other two guidelines that WHO and USDA have. They are saying less than 5 to 6% of calories. You can kind of see the direction in which they are going. Okay. So let's see. So sat fats are found in high quantities in meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And that's what motivates many dietary guidelines to start saying, in dairy, let's make it low-fat dairy. As part of the exercise of making it low-fat, the sat fat also reduces. So that's an attempt to make it low-sat fat. Same thing with meat. An attempt is made to go for lean meat, make it less fatty. In the plant world, there are a few high sat fat rich sources like coconut and coconut derivatives. I come from India. India has some parts of India. Coconuts are found in abundance. They just grow on trees. So it's very easy to go. It's not easy. You have to go. It's a very tall tree, but it's easy to access them and eat lots of coconuts. And then the question is that okay or not? Okay. As per the guidelines, as I have understood, we should really minimize our sat fat intake, especially if we are switching our diet later in life. Okay, if we had been eating this from childhood, that's a different story. Okay, so there's some complexity here. Let me skip the complexity, but I choose to not have any coconuts or coconut derivatives like coconut oil, coconut butter, coconut milk. All of them are out of my system because of the high sat fat thing going on. Okay, there are the palm and palm kernel and palm derivatives. They're also not in my system. Then there's cocoa beans. Okay, and cocoa beans can be converted to cocoa nibs. So these are gone, but there is something called defattened cocoa beans. What is that? If we remove all the fat part, we start getting cocoa powder. So that is okay. That is the cocoa bean minus the fat part. So that's one of the rare processed foods which people consume in whole food plant-based guidelines. It's this cocoa powder. There are a few, okay? The vast majority of foods we consume in whole food plant-based is whole foods. Cocoa powder is one of them. It comes from this cocoa bean in which the sat fat and most of the fat is gone, okay? All right. But even if I remove these two, we still have these moderate amounts sitting here in nuts, seeds, olive, avocados. And, if you start eating whole grains, beans, vegetables, these also have amounts. We just can't escape sat fats. So my strategy, as I told you, is my total fat intake is 10 to 12%. For good reasons. It's not motivated by sat fat reduction. It's motivated by many other reasons. Okay, and as a consequence, my sat fat intake goes down. So I'm careful with nuts, seeds, olive, avocado. Also, I eat just a few seeds. Okay, why do I do all this? I will cover this in a separate video. The motivation is, as I told you before, interventional studies by Ornish, Esselstyn, Barnard on metabolic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, they have shown remarkable results. And the target fat percentage in these studies was 10% total fat intake. Epidemiological data exists. Professor T. Colin Campbell has a very good book summarizing, and that influenced me. There are these beautiful pathophysiology lectures and toxicology lectures. I learned a lot, and so all of this data has played a role in my judgment call for myself that I should follow a low-fat guideline. And just to assure my friends and family that low-fat, like 10% fat intake is not unheard of, populations have done it. I tend to give this one example from epidemiological studies. There are many more populations, but I give this one example. What is this example? It's the Okinawan diet. Many people have heard of it. It's one of those blue zones which are famed for longevity and like lifespan, health span. Okinawan diet was 6% fat as measured in 1949, and the Japanese diet as a whole was 8% fat. Okay, so such diets do exist, and they are associated with good long life and healthy life, with low rates of chronic lifestyle diseases, which are also known as these NCDs, non-communicable diseases. Okay. Let's do a brief review of Dietary Inflammatory Index, okay, because it's connected to what I just showed you. Okay, now this is not an organization, but it's a piece of work which I want to highlight, okay, because it has some interesting ramifications. Now, Dietary Inflammatory Index is an attempt to classify all the foods into pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. Plus, there is also an attempt to associate a numeric score with all the foods to figure out what is more anti-inflammatory, what is more pro-inflammatory than some other food. So, okay. So now I found a nice slide deck. It's at AICR website, American Institute of Cancer Research website. Why? Because, there's something called chronic inflammation. Okay, this is some tissue, some organ in our body can be inflamed for weeks and months and years and decades. That kind of like chronic, sustained inflammation might lead to cancer and many other chronic diseases, right? So since all these associations exist, I really don't want cancer. I really don't want chronic inflammation. So I would like to know what are the pro-inflammatory foods and what are the anti-inflammatory foods, so that if possible, my whole food plate can be anti-inflammatory and no pro-inflammatory foods. Is that possible? Okay. So I will skip how the study was done. It's a study with in which the team did a literature survey. 1,943 papers they inspected, and they studied if you consume a food or a food constituent or a food group, with some property, what happens to inflammation markers? Do they go up? Do they go down? And they studied things like CRP, IL-10, IL-6, that kind of stuff. Okay. So it's a little complex. So I said, is there a summary somewhere? Can I understand in simple words what is this Dietary Inflammatory Index? So I found a video. The video is by James Hibbert. He's one of the lead investigators. I think he's the investigator like in charge of this team. So he says, if I'm eating a diet which is strongly anti-inflammatory, it's going to be plant-based, colorful, and aromatic. That is a summary of this whole index. Okay, but luckily in that same slide deck, I found this amazing slide. It gives us one more level of detail. So they say, after studying all those 1,943 papers, the anti-inflammatory components are this stuff like fruits and vegetables, fiber, whole grains, some spice and seasoning. What is this stuff? And this is the same whole food plant-based food plate. That's what I see in this text. Okay. What are the pro-inflammatory constituents? Sat fat, trans fat, dietary cholesterol. Do you see? Coincidentally, it's the same three things that were in that IUM Institute of Medicine. They are encouraging us to reduce this stuff. Okay, so again, if I use the same knowledge I gained from the IOM stuff, my strategy, as I shared with you, is to eat a low-fat, whole food, plant-based guideline. Okay, that is how I am able to minimize these pro-inflammatory components in my food, and it's in harmony with the Dietary Inflammatory Index. Now, a small tidbit I wanted to share is, we can construct a Mediterranean diet, for example. I'll skip the details of it. And it's much, much better than what is known as the standard American diet, or what most people are eating, right? But it's not the optimal setting of these knobs. In the Mediterranean diet, we still have some pro-inflammatory food constituents left. They have not become zero. For example, dietary cholesterol has not become zero. Trans fat intake has not become zero, because they don't eliminate meat, fish, eggs, and dairy, right? And I'm not sure what happens to the sat fat intake. Basically, if we do this low-fat, whole food, plant-based guideline, then we really minimize all this stuff in a big way. Okay, that's what I choose to do, because I want to reduce inflammation in my body to the degree I can. Okay, so that's my strategy. And when I eat anti-inflammatory foods, then it's kind of like I think some people use this analogy. It's like two armies. It's like the pro-inflammatory army and the anti-inflammatory army, and they're kind of fighting each other. So if you can reduce the strength of one of these armies, then the other army can counter the pro-inflammatory army better. So, these shifts from pro to anti-inflammatory, it's kind of, I don't know how to say this. Its result is amplified. Okay, you have to think of it that way. I think I couldn't explain it properly, but maybe some of you got the idea of what I'm trying to say. Gut microbiome research. Okay, this is a fun topic, super complex topic, but the elegant part is that what we learn from it can be explained in one simple sentence. Okay, so that's why I like this area. So complicated, but it can be simplified. Okay, so again, this is not like an organization. It is. So what I'm saying, this is a slide. I think it's a poster by ESNM, European Society of Neurogastroenterology and Motility. Okay, that's pretty long. This poster is a summary of the gut microbiome research. It's a beautiful summary, but it's full of these complex words. So if we know something, then we can say, yeah, I understand, but it may be hard to understand if you don't know the subject. And of course, it's a conference in which all these people showed up. They know what's going on. Okay, so basically, it's about guts. Our guts are the intestines. And in the intestines, we have a single cell layer. Okay, it's a very critical layer. It kind of separates, you can call the intestinal wall from the contents of the intestines, right? And between these cells are these tight junctions. So it's kind of a layer, and when the guts start getting inflamed, then these tight junctions might start weakening, and in advanced conditions, perforation can start. They call it intestinal permeability. This general word called gut dysbiosis gets used. So basically, this area is too complex. Too many words get used. So this is the big picture, that the gut lining can start getting permeable. Okay, and if that happens, then what happens? Whatever contents are in the intestines can start leaking. When they leak, there's blood right behind. There's the immune system, so a cascade of consequences happens. And then there are fancy narratives of what do guts do when they are normal or healthy. Okay, so this whole area is very complex. And I guess you got the big picture idea of what they're trying to do. And let's look at these two boxes because these are simple to understand. Okay, let's go through these two boxes. So one of the boxes says, what leads to gut barrier disruption? What compromises it? What makes it leaky? What makes it, permeable? Okay. Modern diet and lifestyle. What are the three factors they have identified? Well, let's look at this one. Indiscriminate use of antibiotics and other frequently prescribed drugs. Okay. Stress. But there is a dietary component. Okay. That is the number one here. What do they say? Western diet high in fat, sugar, and low in fiber. So high fat, high sugar, low fiber. So what if we were to do the opposite of all three of these? What is that? Low fat, sugar free, high fiber. Okay. So low fat, I follow a low fat guideline. It is sugar free, as I have been telling you. These are so refined sugars are the macronutrient extracts, they're carbohydrate extracts. So we don't use them in whole food plant-based guidelines. High fiber. So I'll talk about high fiber now. Okay. And what happens, if you want to reinforce the gut barrier, the number one thing to do is dietary fiber. Okay, copious amounts will help. And the secondary point is probiotics. So these are called prebiotics, and these are called probiotics. So prebiotics is the main emphasis of the gut microbiome community. Okay, so there is this amazing talk. I like this one a lot. Full of insights. It's by Dr. Erika Schonenberg. So she and her husband, they are running a lab in Stanford. It's focused on gut microbiome. So I like this talk. It's in plain English, lots of insights. Somewhere she mentioned something which was elegant and amazing. Okay, she said she has understood what makes our guts healthy, and there's a one-line summary of the dietary aspects to make our gut health amazing, and that is eat a fiber-rich diet. Okay, it's as simple as that. Eat a fiber-rich diet. It's so that's the elegance in this area. That after studying there are a few thousand papers in gut microbiome. It's a very rich area. A lot of papers are being written. It's a hot area, and dozens of books are being written. But what are we supposed to do to take care of our guts? This is the one-line summary. This is the main point. Eat a fiber-rich diet. Okay. So what is a high fiber diet? That merits a question, right? So I'll share 4 points with you. Animal foods have zero fiber. Okay, there is no fiber in meat, fish, eggs, and there is no fiber in milk and products that we make out of milk. For example, butter, cream, cheese, ghee, khoya, mawa, buttermilk, chas, 2% milk or fat-free milk, none of those things have any fiber in them. Fiber is found exclusively in plant foods, okay, in whole grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. These things have fiber, okay. Second, we have these 3 macronutrient extracts, like protein extracts and protein, they are not used in large amounts, so we don't talk about them much, but these 2 are used in very large amounts all over the world. Fat extracts, like oils, and carbohydrate extracts, like refined sugars. So these 2, oil and sugar, like granulated sugar, like the one that we add in beverages, and these oils, they have no fiber, 0 fiber. Just to reinforce the point, this is soybeans, 100 calories, and this is soybean oil. Look what happens. Protein is gone, carbohydrates are gone, micronutrients are gone, and fiber is also gone. It's just fats. It's a fat extract, okay? So it's not a fiber-rich food. It has 0 fiber, okay? Refined grains are fiber deficient, okay? They're not 0 fiber, but they're fiber deficient. But to what degree have we lost fiber? Through refinement. But let's first define what is refinement. Whole grains have 3 parts: bran, germ, and endosperm. And many of us would prefer to eat the endosperm-rich part of the whole grain. Why? It's sweeter, it is carbohydrate-rich, and all of us, by virtue of being human, we have a propensity for these sweet things. They're tastier, and they give us energy. We can run around. Okay, so if we strip away the bran and the germ, and we focus only on the endosperm, then we start losing nutrition. Okay, especially we lose micronutrients. And we start losing fiber. To what degree? So if you compare brown rice with white rice, then white rice has about 1/3 of the fiber of brown rice on average. If you compare whole wheat flour and refined wheat flour, then refined wheat flour has 1/4 of the fiber of whole wheat flour. So that's how we are losing fiber if we eat polished versions or refined versions of wheat and rice. So in the wheat world, we have white flour, and we also have this semolina or suji rava. Even semolina, suji rava, bran and germ has been stripped to some degree. Okay, so that's why I don't go after. I go for whole grains, in which all 3 are maximized. In the rice world, we have polished rice like white rice and its derivatives. We can take white rice and make flattened poha. We can do puffing. We get murmura. We can do rice crackers. So I stay away from these. I would prefer to have actual brown rice, red rice, purple rice, black rice, wild rice. There are so many rice. Okay. In the millet world, we have hulled and pearled. So I prefer the hulled one because it has more bran and germ. Okay. Last point. Ultra-processed foods are often, not always, often fiber deficient. So that is why doctors like Dr. Greger, they devise these rules which we can employ if we are motivated to go and eat ultra-processed foods. So it requires some understanding of labels, and what I do is I don't eat ultra-processed foods at all. So I don't have to memorize any such rule. I don't have to understand this. So it simplifies my life. But I'm just pointing out that such rules emerge because often there is a concern that many processed foods are low in fiber. They are fiber deficient. So this is the summary. Animal foods, oil and sugar, they have 0 fiber. Refined grains are fiber deficient. And UPFs, ultra-processed foods, are often, not always, often fiber deficient. Fiber is found exclusively in plant foods. Okay. Now look at this whole food plant-based food plate that I follow. Do you see? It has no animal foods. It has no macronutrient extracts like oil and sugar. If we don't eat refined grains, we eat whole grains. UPFs are not there. Ultra-processed foods are missing. It's full of plants in their whole form. So you see how it maximizes the fiber intake? Okay. Okay, this is the last section of this really long presentation, and this one is about heart health. So we will see, is it true that a high fiber and low fat diet is optimal for heart health, and it protects our heart and in fact fortifies our heart in a great way? Let's see. Heart disease, the big picture is, heart disease is unfortunately the #1 killer of men and women in the world. Okay, worldwide. Let's look at some statistic. Cause of death worldwide based on the global burden of disease data. #1 cause of death, this big red bar that you see, is heart disease, 17 million deaths. #2 is cancers, 9.5 or so. It's by far the #1 cause of death worldwide. Let's look at it in more detail. So let's look at low SDI countries. SDI means socio-demographic index. So it's kind of, they are lower income countries. So look at this red deaths here, right? So this big blob is all the deaths. Infectious, maternal, neonatal and nutrition conditions are responsible for a lot of deaths. And this is heart disease and stroke, and this is cancer. Okay, let's look at middle STI income countries. So these are richer countries. These red colored deaths shown here, their percentage drops. Heart disease and stroke went up, cancer went up. Okay. Now let's look at even richer countries. Middle STI went up. You know what's going on? This is the high middle STI countries. Look at heart disease and stroke even more, and cancer is rising. And now in the high STI countries, so these are the highest income, heart disease, stroke went down a little, and cancer became large. But no matter where we are, heart disease and stroke is a very big factor. And if you accumulate all over the world, it's the number one cause of death. Now let's look at India. Since I'm from India, that's why I have an interest in India. 1990 till 2017, this is 30 years almost. And look, same thing, right? The red colored deaths that I was showing you, communicable, maternal, neonatal, nutritional diseases, the number of deaths attributed to these is going down over time. Fewer and fewer deaths, and more deaths are NCDs, non-communicable diseases. And cardiovascular is the number one. So now many of my friends don't face these conditions. Most of my friends, the people I talk to, they are facing NCDs, and half of the NCDs approximately is cardiovascular. Cardiovascular is so prominent. If we were to remove this red part of the graph and say we know somebody is here, then it's half the deaths of these. Okay, it's a lot. Now look at Punjab, and all this data is coming from IHME data visualization for India, which is based on the global burden of disease. It's a very nice visualization tool. We can plot all these graphs ourselves. Look at Punjab. It has a very high burden of heart disease. This whole blue thing is cardiovascular. Okay. Now let's look at Asian Indians. They are also called Indian Americans, people like me who are originally from India and now in USA. So such people are called Asian Indians, Indian Americans. I found a paper, a recent one, that mentioned in women and men, number one cause of death, almost 28% deaths is heart disease. Men, 31% of deaths, heart disease. Okay, so many deaths are due to heart disease. In my own family, one of my maternal grandparents, he died due to heart disease. So now comes next step. Okay, heart disease is virtually non-existent in some parts of the world, rural and so-called primitive places. Non-existent. Okay, non-existent. I found it hard to believe. Is it really true? So I'll show you a quote. This is from a paper by Dr. Esselstyn, okay, who I am a big fan of him because he has done amazing studies. Let's read this. In this paper, he says, if you, as a cardiologist or as a cardiac surgeon, decided to hang your shingle. Hang your shingle means you set up a shop or a business and you're waiting for patients to show up because you're a cardiologist or a surgeon. If you do this in Okinawa, Papua Highlands of New Guinea, rural China, Central Africa, or with the Tarahumara Indians of northern Mexico, you'd better plan on a different profession because these countries do not have cardiovascular disease. That's a stunning statement. I had no clue that there exist some cultures at some point of time. These cultures had no heart disease. Okay, I found it hard to believe, but it's true. So I dug into literature to verify. And then the second observation he makes is, the common thread is that they all thrive on a whole food plant-based nutrition with minimal intake of animal products. Okay. So I thought, okay, let me look for papers on Papua New Guinea. Like, do they really have zero coronary heart disease? So it turns out that I found this paper, 1988, and in the abstract itself, they mention ischemic heart disease was unknown in Papua New Guinea until 1964, when the first case was reported. Amazing, right? Since then, they say there's been a rapid rise in frequency confined to its major urban area. Okay, it's going up in urban areas. See, and then I said, okay, let's look at rural Africa. Is it really true? Rural Africa had and Esselstyn mentions West Africa. Okay, but let's look at rural Africa as a whole. So that leads us to the work of Dr. Burkitt, who's called the fiber man. And let's see what these connections are. So Dr. Burkitt is this scientist. He was a surgeon trained, I believe, in UK, and he came to Africa. I forgot when, maybe 1950s, 1960s, and he studied who's dying due to what reason. He did many things. Among them, he studied what food people are eating and what kind of diseases people are getting, and he started seeing some connections. And he saw that fiber plays a very important role, and he noticed that people who are eating a high fiber diet have very low disease rates of NCDs. Okay, and that's why he's remembered for his contribution. Prior to his work, and there were a few other scientists who were working in similar areas, so you can say prior to their collective work, fiber was not seen as something important. It was seen as fluff, like a delivery vehicle, which doesn't really do anything because nothing happens to fiber until it reaches the intestinal tract. Okay, so, and what happens in the intestinal tract, all that research has flourished only recently in the last 20-25 years, where now we know a lot about gut microbiome. But in the past, fiber was not seen as important, so he highlighted a fiber-rich diet is protective. So he never said fiber directly is responsible, but a fiber-rich diet is crucial. For what? Okay, so is it true that there was zero heart disease in rural Africa? Let's look at it from the heart disease perspective. So this is a Greger video. Dr. Greger is a whole food plant-based luminary, and I learned all this stuff from his video. So he cites a landmark study. I saw the study. It's very interesting, by the way. This study compares, by chance, Ugandan native population, I think it was a rural population, with Indian immigrants in those days, 1959. So I'll make a separate video on that particular study, and they compared heart disease rates. Stunning contrast. Okay, the Ugandan population had virtually none, like zero, and the Indian immigrants had very large amount of heart disease. And then they compared their food plates, and you can kind of see what's going on. So that's a separate video I'll make, but let's just see what Dr. Greger is saying. Coronary heart disease was practically non-existent among those eating traditional plant-based diets in Africa, and the landmark study was done in Uganda. And then Kenya also, and how do we know that? For example, 1,000 Kenyan autopsies were done. Not a single case of appendicitis, not a single heart attack, 3 diabetics out of 1,000, 1 peptic ulcer, no gallstones, no evidence of high blood pressure. Okay, amazing. Now, I dug a little more. I said, let's look, is it really true? So here's a paper, 1997. It's a survey paper of sorts, Walker and Cerelli, and let's see what's going on here. So what I did was look at the epidemiologically section. Okay, so look at the citations, like numerous reviews have emphasized the rarity of coronary heart disease in Africa. So in multiple parts of Africa, CHD, coronary heart disease, did not exist or was rare. Okay, so 1960, Shaper and Williams considered CHD to be extremely rare in Uganda. Okay, 1977, Vaughan. So he wrote one of the survey papers. He described Africans as virtually free of hypertension. There is no hypertension, and there is no cardiac or coronary heart disease either. It's zero in many parts of Africa or rare. Amazing. Okay, and then you can look at Nigeria, something in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Johannesburg, Durban. Okay, all these places. This whole article explains that it was relatively rare or even non-existent in some parts. So, and it's not just heart disease. Okay, papers were written through observations and actual. So many of these conditions, which are very common in USA, and they're common in many parts of the world, they were rare or non-existent. So I love the non-existent part more, okay, because it's just not there. And heart disease is one of them in some of these places. Let's look at the list. Obesity, hiatal hernia, hemorrhoids and varicose veins, colorectal cancer, number 2 cause of death in USA, right? Diverticulosis. If I remember correctly, 70% of the population above 70 in USA has diverticulosis. Some of them have diverticulitis. Appendicitis, such a common cause of abdominal surgery, rare or non-existent. Okay, gallbladder diseases. I kind of remember Dr. Burkett was actually a surgeon, and if I remember correctly, he had to do 1 gallbladder surgery in like 20 years. Something like that is going on. Ischemic heart disease. This is the one that makes us drop dead due to heart attacks. The commonest cause of death in the world. A rarity in plant-based populations. And as I mentioned, Kenyan autopsy studies showed 0, and many other places 0. So see what's going on? It's just mind-blowing. And let's study it a little more. Doctors in sub-Saharan Africa during the 30s and 40s recognized that certain diseases commonly met in Western communities were rare in rural African peasants, okay, the rural communities. This hearsay talk greeted any new doctor on arrival in Africa. Even the teaching manuals stated that diabetes, coronary heart disease, appendicitis, peptic ulcer, gallstones, hemorrhoids, constipation were rare in African blacks. What were they eating? Okay, in India, in North India, we say, "Yaar, ye log khate kya hai?" Okay, that means literally, what are these people eating that they are like this? So observations were made. These people eat foods that contain many skins and fibers, such as beans and corn, and pass a bulky stool 2 or 3 times a day. Notice this emphasis on the bulky stool thing. how do you get bulky stools? If you eat a fiber-rich diet, that will trigger bulky stools, right? So this is a fiber-rich diet, and some of the constituents are explained, but they were eating more things also. They were eating tubers as well. And okay, so this is Dr. Burkitt. He made all these observations that brought fiber into prominence, and some of his quotes are fascinating. Let's study his quotes. He says, the health of a country's people could be determined by the size of their stools and whether they floated or sank, not by their technology. He's kind of referring to Western countries, like Europeans and North Americans, technologically advanced countries, but they have high rates of NCDs, non-communicable diseases, like heart disease, for example. And the populations he was studying, they had virtually no heart disease, and some populations had zero. So from that standpoint, he's saying this, okay? And he says, if you pass small stools, you have to have large hospitals, okay? And now let's see what he's saying. What were these people eating? It's very interesting. Let's see it step by step. He says our bodies are adapted to a Stone Age diet of roots and vegetables. He's emphasizing this thing, kandamul, bhalpul, patti pani. What is this stuff? I think I mentioned it earlier in this video. These are fruits and vegetables. In India, the roots are kandamul, and this is all vegetables. So it kind of brings me joy to see all these interconnections across cultures and what makes us healthy, okay? He also says food should not be prepared in fat. Okay, so there's a concept called added fats. Just like we have added sugars on nutrition labels, in some nutrition circles, we also have the concept of added fats. What is added fats? So these are things like ghee and butter and oils. So what he's saying is, do not use these additives. Just consume natural foods. And this high fiber diet is basically going to be plant food. So don't add ghee, don't add oil, don't add this lard. I mean, don't add no added fat. That's what he's saying. He's saying low fat. Frying pan is really bad. I mean, you should give to your enemy. So this has to do with taking fats and frying food in them. Okay, so this is kind of what he's saying, Dr. Burkitt, based on his observations. Okay, let's go back to this article I chanced upon, which is like a review article published in 1997, and they're talking about heart disease in Africa. It's the outlook for Africa. Let's read this. In Africa, coronary heart disease is near absent in rural areas. And then they say among town dwellers, town dwellers are richer people in general. They are wealthier. And let's see what happens. They say intakes of food, especially fat, have risen. So they are eating more fats as a percentage of calories. And intakes of fiber-containing foods have fallen. Low fiber, high fat. Do you see what's going on? This is the observation. As people have become wealthier in African town dwellers, this transition is happening, this nutrition transition. And then they say serum cholesterol level is almost double of the rural populations living traditionally. Obesity is going up, hypertension is going up, and smoking is going up. Okay, and the level of physical activity has fallen. Okay, all this is happening. Now they say, with these increases in risk factors, we can expect urban Africans to attain the high mortality rate for coronary heart disease now experienced by Afro-Americans. Okay, so the Afro-Americans are people of who are originally from Africa, who are in USA. Those people are Afro-Americans. Prevention by urging reversion to previous lifestyle behavior is a non-starter. Okay, that's a sad statement, but a very insightful statement. If you just tell people, within the same country, if you tell somebody, look, this population, rural people, they don't have heart disease and they eat differently, and the town dwellers eat differently. If you tell the town dwellers, eat like the rural people, they don't want to change. It happens everywhere in the world, not just Africa. It's my experience. Nobody really wants to eat like the rural people in different parts of the world where the lowest mortality rates were found for non-communicable diseases. It's a very tough struggle to tell somebody eat like that. But they have this statement, however, as long as Africa remains impoverished, a major rise in CHD is unlikely. What is this? So if the country, if the continent remains poor, heart disease will not rise. What they're saying is heart disease rises with affluence. As people get richer, heart disease takes off. Do you see what's going on here? And they're kind of mentioning high fat, low fiber. Okay, let's see. And they also mentioned a bit of smoking and physical fitness activity. But dietary factor was this one, right? Okay. Oh, I should have shown you this slide because I copied whatever I was speaking. It's all written here. Okay. So that motivates us to study is it really true what the paper is saying, that as long as Africa remains impoverished, coronary heart disease won't rise? It's a sad statement, but I mean, let's study. Okay, there's a concept called diseases of affluence. Okay, which are rich people diseases. Okay, now this was coined, I don't know, in maybe 1940s or so, 50s or 60s. There's a Wikipedia article on disease of affluence. This is diseases of rich people. Okay, which ones? Chronic non-communicable diseases, NCDs. Examples are type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular disease. So what is this stuff? This is the Alzheimer's, dementia kind of diseases, and strokes. And there is peripheral vascular disease. These have to do with blood flow. Actually, all of these, many of these, like CHD, coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, bunch of them are related to blood flow. If somebody can grasp how to have optimal blood flow, zero viscosity, not zero. We should not be making our blood viscous. We should not be hardening our arteries. We should not be narrowing them. How to accomplish that so that excellent blood flow is accomplished? That actually is a solution to tackling a bunch of these diseases. So that's another perspective, like how to have optimal blood flow. We can kind of structure the whole discussion around just that one theme. But let's come back to our discussion here. There's obesity, hypertension, cancer. Okay, so and there's a nutrition transition. Some of the foods that were eaten by rural populations, which was, for example, they eat wild greens, they eat whole grains, and as people get richer, they don't feel like eating wild greens, and they start doing refined grains. So rural people's food was referred, as peasant food or prisoner food or animal food. What is animal food? When people start eating animal products, they start seeing plant foods as animal food, like animals eat them. Okay, and so people who start getting used to consuming animal foods in large quantities, they don't want to eat plant foods, which is what the rural populations were eating, because that is peasant food. Okay, all these transitions happen, and this is not just Africa. I have seen this happen. There are papers written on this. Multiple countries experience the same phenomenon. Okay. So let's go to this Wikipedia article. It's fascinating, and somewhere they have a diet section, right? What are the dietary factors contributing to this disease of affluence? So these are the 4 dietary factors in that article as of 2023. Let's see what they are and study them. So one aspect of the dietary factors is low fiber diet. Okay, so let's study. Is it true that those 4 factors which contribute to disease of affluence effectively make the diet low fiber? Okay, so this is the question we'll explore. So is it true that these 4 factors trigger a lower and lower fiber intake? Okay, it's kind of easy. The first factor here is oils and sugar. Oil and sugar have no fiber, zero fiber. I talked about fiber a short while ago in this presentation. Meat and dairy is going up, so meat and dairy has zero fiber. These are animal derived foods. Fiber is found exclusively in plants. Okay. Third factor, refined flours. Refined grains are fiber deficient, so loss in fiber. Processed, cooked, and commercially provided foods. Okay, now these, not all of them, but some of them, and in some cases many of them, start becoming ultra processed foods. So not all of them, but many of them start becoming fiber deficient. So if we start going in these 4 directions, like more and more oil and sugar, more and more animal foods, more and more refined grains, more and more ultra processed foods, we start reducing our total fiber intake. Do you see? These same 4 factors listed trigger lower fiber diet. Now, if our fiber intake becomes lower and lower and lower, we start increasing the risk of constipation. Okay, and constipation, I have come to understand, is just the tip of the iceberg. Like constipation, low fiber diet is associated with many health conditions, like the metabolic conditions, cancers, autoimmune conditions. You can just Google, just look for, is there an association between low fiber and pick any disease like diabetes, low fiber and diabetes. Is there a connection? Low fiber and heart disease, low fiber and let's say breast cancer. Is there a connection? And you will find, yep, there are associations between. So I really want to avoid all of these diseases, and I want to avoid constipation. It's not a good feeling to be constipated. So that's why I seek a high fiber diet. Okay. And you can see Dr. Burkitt's quotes, right, which I just went through. If you have a high fiber diet, we have large stools and low NCDs. Okay, so is it possible to have a diet in which we don't do all 4 things? Like this is the dietary factors causing disease of affluence. So could we make an attempt to just not do and in fact go in the opposite direction, like just eliminate them? Okay, it turns out it's possible, and that is the whole food plant-based food plate advocated by American College of Lifestyle Medicine. It's just amazing, right? So this is the food plate I have chosen to follow. I also follow a low-fat aspect of it, but that's not relevant for the for the fiber discussion. But you see this interconnection. Okay. Another point. Let's discuss the following thing. Is it true that affluent people start having higher calorie density foods? What is this question? Let's try to study it. So these are the 4 things mentioned in Disease of Affluence, and my knowledge of nutrition, whatever I have understood, these are the 4 factors. Okay, the main factors from a dietary perspective: oil and sugar, animal foods, refined grains, ultra processed foods. Okay, and increased intake of all 4 or any subset. The more we do these 3-4 things, we move towards high calorie density food. So let's study what is calorie density. So calorie density has to do with calories per gram. Okay, so this is a nice picture from Forks Over Knives. So oil has very high calorie density. So 500 calories of oil is very little. It doesn't fill up the stomach. Very little of the stomach gets full. Then there's cheese, meat, and on the right hand side is fruits and vegetables. So 500 calories of fruits and vegetables is a lot of volume wise, and even if you look at it visually, this is like 480 calories and this is 4 tablespoons olive oil of 480 calories. You know what's going on? These are water rich, low calorie density foods. We don't get a lot of calories through a large volume of food. Okay, now there is a nice infographic by Jeff Novick going back to late 90s. In whole food plant-based circles, we often discuss this infographic, like what has he plotted. He's plotted the calorie density of different foods commonly eaten, and it's a calories per pound. Okay, so let's do this analysis. These 4 things. Let's start with oil and sugar. So what is the calorie density of oil and sugar? These are the 2 macronutrient extracts. Oil is the most calorie dense food known. Okay, it is off the chart, like it's the highest, and sugar is somewhere here. So these are on the high side. The plants are on this side. Okay, let's look at a slightly generalized concept: added fats and added sugars. Okay, so they're like kind of oil and sugar, but if you use the word added fats, then it's oil, butter, cheese, and even lard or something like those are added fats. They're all high calorie density. How about number 2, animal foods? So they are kind of here, and unfortunately Jeff Novick doesn't have milk or dairy on here. I wish he had plotted dairy, then it would be part of this chart. But in general, these foods are kind of in the middle, but they are higher than the plant foods. And fruits and vegetables is really low. So if you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, we are eating low calorie density food. So as compared to this food system in general, the introduction of animal foods does make us have higher calorie density foods. Okay. Third, refined grains. Okay. Now, refined grains are not eaten directly. Like nobody seems to soak them, sprout them. We often create things like breads and tortillas and flat bread or something, right? So when we do those steps, calorie density goes up. Okay. So this is tortillas and bread, and this is whole grains on this side. Okay. Let's look at ultra processed foods. Now, so these are processed, cooked, commercially available. So let's look at, generally speaking, what happens to UPFs. Now, there are many of them. Okay, but in this chart, we just have a few: chips, cookies, ice cream, and they tend to be high calorie density. Okay. Now, what happens if we don't eat any of this? Okay, then what do we eat? These things are gone. We are left with plant foods. Okay, and a few plant foods have high calorie density. Let's study the high calorie density plant foods. Okay, nuts and seeds. Okay, they have high calorie density. So I follow a low fat diet, and I have cut down my nuts and seeds intake. I take just a few seeds, and that way I can be on this side of the spectrum. Okay, in the plant foods, in the low calorie density plant foods. There's also dried fruit sitting here. Okay, so if you take an actual fruit and we start removing the water, we dried it, then imagine some dried apricot or the dried peaches. We can eat so many of them. I'm sure I can eat 10 of them, but imagine eating 10 peaches. Okay, we will feel full at some point of time, but 10 dried peaches, I'm pretty sure I can keep eating them. So that's what's going on here. Dried fruit, it leads to overeating. We tend to eat more of these calorie dense foods. That's the main idea. Avocado is also on the higher side. So I try to reduce my fat intake, so I don't even touch avocados. Okay. So that is the main point being made here. Is it true that if we do these things, we are eating high calorie density foods? And looks like, yeah, and if we remove all of them, we get a low calorie density food system. And that is how, we feel full with low calorie density foods, and we are able to not become obese. That's how I understand what's happening. Okay. Here is another infographic which explains what I explained in a slightly different way. But I will skip the details. They are using this red light system. So these are the green ones. This is basically low calorie density foods, and they're all plant foods. Water, water is water. Plant foods are vegetables, fruits, grains and starches, and legumes. These are the 4 main food groups. And then avocados and nuts and seeds, as I mentioned, are shown in yellow. So they will say, don't eat too many of them, exercise some control, and make it a low-fat system that will trigger control, right? And then the red ones are animal products, processed carbs, these like processed foods with carbohydrate-rich one, then junk food, and they're calling it oils and fats. These have high calorie density. So if we kind of make our food plates with this stuff, they become low calorie density foods. And they say consumption of these foods leads to weight loss, and these ones lead to weight gain. And this is by Craig Martin and Dr. Kevin Fullin on behalf of kenoshahad.org. Okay, so I love this nice infographic they have made. Thank you so much. Okay, now let's see. We have these diseases of affluence. Is it true that as we get more affluent, we consume more processed foods? So let's explore this claim that higher income leads to more processed foods and less natural foods. Is this really true? See, the Wikipedia article mentions these 3-4 components, right? Oils and sugar, animal foods, refined grains, and ultra-processed foods. So even oil and sugar is a form of processing, right? It's not a natural food. Even refined grains is a form of processing, and ultra-processed foods are very clearly processed foods. So let's look at all the 3 of these in together, like they come from industrial processing. Is it true that the intake of processed foods generally goes up? Okay, so for this, I found this paper from 1970. It's a nice one. It's by Alan Berg, and the title of the paper is Increased Income and Improved Nutrition, a Shibboleth Explained. What is Shibboleth? Shibboleth means, I think it means a cherished belief that is not really true or has ceased to be true, something like that. It is kind of a survey of multiple countries in Asia, Africa, South America, and what do people do as they get richer? And this is way back in 1970s, and they will show higher income actually leads to a poorer diet. That is what the paper is explaining. So there's a lot of text here. Let me walk you through it step by step. It has some fascinating insights. So these are all quotes from this paper. It says people spending more money for food may eat more, but not necessarily better. Okay, often with increased income, certain items are discarded from the diet since they are identified as foods of the poor. Okay, as a rich person, we often look for, okay, what is it that I can buy which I could not buy earlier, or what is expensive, and foods which are commonly available, which poor people are eating, we often start dropping them, even though they might be supremely nutritious food. And the paper has example after example worldwide. Okay, one example is in India. So the paper says, okay, the common example in India is the shift with the first increment of income from sorghum or millet to rice, and from home pounded rice to polished rice. Okay, so basically they're saying sorghum or millet, it must have been cheap to some communities. They dropped it, they went towards rice, which was probably expensive, and this home pounded rice was replaced by polished rice because this came from the industry. Why? The latter is aesthetically more pleasing but nutritionally less valuable. Now polished rice, the bran and germ is gone, so it is well known to be nutritionally inferior. Okay, in some countries, dark bread is still regarded as a poor man's food. What is dark bread? So dark bread is made of whole grains, and it's very compact, and some of these dark breads are actually kind of not squishy, they're quite hard. I have a German friend who makes bread at home, and he very proudly tells me authentic German bread is dark, and like they actually knock on the bread to see is it like solid or not. Okay, so that kind of bread is nutritious bread. But if we start making polished grains, refined flours, and we also make pastry flour, the finer the flour, the fluffier the bread. So that kind of white bread, fluffy bread, that becomes the modern bread. Okay, and this original traditional dark bread full of nutrition is seen as a poor man's food. Okay, in some countries. Okay, in much of India, this is 1970s, there's some observation, greens and papaya are regarded with disdain The word is disdain, because they are plentiful and inexpensive. They are so widespread, so anybody could eat them, and greens are one of the most nutritious vegetables. In fact, if you look at all the foods put together, I have come to understand leafy greens are full of nutrition. Okay, the micronutrients per calorie are kind of maximized in greens. Okay, in East Pakistan, a gentleman is somebody, richer, and they wear a different type of dress, which is different from people who are poorer. They do not eat red rice. Now, I don't know what they eat. They must have been eating white rice. And rich people do not eat pulse leaves. Again, leaves are nutrition rich. What is happening here? Okay, white corn replaces the more nutritious yellow, and white bread replaces tortillas. These are deficient. Okay, and what is called aesthetic pleasure and the level of social prestige are more important. Okay, quinoa, an excellent whole grain, is associated with low social status. Okay. What is happening here? As people made more money, then unrefined sugar or jaggery, which can also be made in local communities or at home, that's being replaced by refined sugar. Okay, in Madras, a form of steamed pudding with coconut is never served in Brahmin restaurants because it's associated with lower class diets. So Allenberg is making all these observations. Okay, so you see what's going on. Here is one more sad state of affairs. Right, higher income, does it necessarily mean better nutrition for us during our lifetimes? Well, there's an observation that it's associated with less breastfeeding. Okay, how? Way back in 1960s, again, I think it's from the Allenberg paper, they have an example. They say, related to increased income is a dramatic decline in breastfeeding. 60% of lower income Gujarati women, who were in those days making under $2 per capita income per month, continue to breastfeed their children beyond 6 months, but this figure drops sharply as income rise. Only 8% of higher income mothers offer the breast at the same period. Okay, and now we can look at 2021. Among the low income countries, at the age of 6 months, right? Are they being breastfed or not? Very large percentage, but lower middle income, upper middle income, high income countries, and this is a 113 countries survey being done. Okay, so the percentage is rising as many of us are realizing that we ought to breastfeed our babies. It's increasing, but you see, higher income is associated with lower nutrition. Okay. Processed foods. So these are actually ultra processed foods. These are the soups and candies and chips and stuff like that. So there's a paper like this. It's Obesity Reviews. It's about ultra processed foods. They're called UPFs. It's very clear. High income communities, places in the world, they have more sales per capita. Upper middle income, yes, less. Lower middle income, even lower. But everybody's intake is increasing over time. Okay, the same is true for processed drinks, ultra processed drinks, you can call them. Same, and you can also see it by continents or regions in the world. So Australasia and North America has the highest, sales per kilogram per person, and as we go towards South and Southeast Asia and Africa, it is less. But every region seems to be growing. Okay, so now let's explore diseases of affluence. Is it true that affluence is associated with increased intake of animal foods? So let's explore this claim that higher income translates into more animal foods and less plant foods. Is this really true? This Wikipedia article on diseases of affluence, they mentioned 4 dietary factors. One of them was higher consumption of meat and dairy, which is animal products. Is it true that as we get richer worldwide, different communities start eating more animal foods? So here is a study, 2001, okay? They looked at 57 countries and they plotted the percentage of energy from animal sources. And this is annual per capita GDP. So you can see rich countries on the right hand side and the poorer countries on the left hand side as measured by the GDP, right? So with higher GDP countries, 35 to 40% of calories are coming from animal foods. But if you look at lower GDP countries, there are countries with almost 3%, 4%, but it's kind of in the range of 4% to 20% or so. There's a trend going up. Okay. Now this is 1970s. Again, the theme, as I have been exploring with you, is higher income may not lead to better nutrition. Now here's a paper by Professor Altschul, and he's commenting on animal foods, what makes people attractive to animal foods. He says it must be remembered that people don't eat animal foods just because they're nutritious. They eat them because they like them, and we'll eat more of them whenever their income permits. Okay, and he also mentions humans will sacrifice quantity and quality for food for variety and aesthetics. Okay, and for carnivals and festivities. Okay, he's talking about worldwide, not just one specific country. Okay. Now, here is an interesting chart, a fascinating chart. Okay, this is from way back in 1959 to 61, this time frame. What are we studying in this chart? Okay, in this chart, income per person is on the x-axis. So, high-income countries like USA are on the right-hand side, and low-income countries in those days are on the left-hand side. So, just to see the contrast, look at this. United States was $2,288 per person annual income in 1959-61, and India was merely 68. Look at this stark contrast. That's why India is on the left-hand side, USA is on the right-hand side. Okay, what exactly are we plotting? So, on the y-axis is pounds of grain per person per year. Okay, so look what's going on. So, grain for food, this is the bottom curve. Okay, so as income level increased, grain consumption went up. Okay, production and consumption both went up because many people in India and poorer nations were actually not eating enough food. So we need more food. So that need was met. But then at some point of time, the curve takes a nosedive. It becomes less and less. Okay, so what happened? But look at the grain. But total grain use, this is called grain production, is more and more and more. What is happening? Where is all this grain going? What is the purpose of all this grain? All this extra grain, a lot of it is actually increased demand for animal products. What are animal products? Animal products, they are like cows and sheep and chicken. We feed them a lot of grain and plant foods so that they become big, and then they are killed for meat, and we also get milk from them. That's kind of, and eggs. That's what kind of what's going on. But look at the ratio. Okay, so let's look at this. In India, what was going on in 340 pounds a year, of which 298 was direct consumption of grains. The rest is for seed. It's a tightly set up system. But in USA, 1,650 pounds a year was being produced. Direct consumption is less than 10% of that. It's 157 pounds. Almost 1,500 pounds was fed to animals. Do you see what's going on? The stark contrast between how the richest countries and the poorest countries, poor countries were operating. This is 1959-60. Okay. And this is a composite picture with all that information. Now, one consequence of having such large consumption of animal foods like meat and dairy is that we have to allocate a lot of land for having them around. Okay, so somebody did a land survey. They plotted this in an interesting way in USA. Like, this gives us an idea. Like, how much land has been allocated for cows, pastures, ranges, and there are some sheep and goats here and horses here. This whole thing is for animal farming. And livestock feed is this much, and the food that we eat is this much, and there is rural housing going on here, urban housing is this much. You kind of get an idea of how much land is needed for animal farming. And there are other consequences of having so many animals around in animal farms. Okay, it impacts the environment. How much water is needed? Is water getting impacted negatively? So is water pollution a problem? How about air pollution? Is it affecting global greenhouse emissions? There are many aspects of it. I'm not even touching that. I'm just showing you just a sense of scale of what is going on, and it has other environmental impacts when we do something like this. Okay, so what the story I have understood is that some people, there are multiple factors behind why higher income leads to more animal foods. Taste, as Professor Alschul was saying, many of us eat it because we like the taste of it. Okay, and whenever our income permits, we keep buying more and more animal foods. In general, they are more expensive because you see how much grain is needed to feed them. Cultural reasons. The cultural reason is that, as we get richer, we want to distinguish ourselves from the poor. It's kind of a human instinct kind of a thing. And we gravitate towards more expensive foods. Okay, so it's a cultural thing going on. Now comes the more important point, which is there has been a mistaken scientific belief for the last 100, possibly 100 plus years, that animal protein is superior to plant protein and is therefore preferable. Okay, so let's explore this scientific belief because it has huge ramifications. This kind of a belief impacts us like laypersons. We are taught, wow, animal protein is more superior. Then it affects government policies. It affects economic policies. It has widespread ramifications. And many of us grew up with this notion that we really must have animal protein because it's essential in some sense. People who are accustomed to dairy, we have been told dairy is essential. Where is our protein coming from? People who are eating eggs and meat and fish, we get taught we really need meat or eggs or fish for protein. So where are these beliefs coming from? It's been a mistaken scientific belief. Let me explore this subject with you in some detail. Okay, so here is a publication from 1970. It's not the only one. This is like a glimpse, like a window into how people used to think about this subject. Okay, now what is this publication? This is Foreign Economic Development Report, and it's focused on developing countries and low-income consumers in these countries, and the goal is how do we market foods to them through private enterprise. Okay, so if you look at many scientists, right, worldwide, 1940s, 50s, 60s, many scientists and many policymakers and foreign economic aid, you can say agencies, they have been very concerned about poverty and food supply. And genuinely, there has been a concern. We should figure out what is the food people should eat and how to supply it globally and how to enable food production in each and every country. So these are honest efforts, genuine efforts. But let's see the mindset. What was going on in decision makers and scientific circles for the last 150 years? Okay, so let's read this. The observation is people in the lower economic groups. Okay, and these groups are across Asia, Africa, South America, multiple continents, multiple countries. People in the lower economic groups generally have been and are in what we term the produce economy. It can also be called the subsistence economy, right? That is, they depend on the direct output of nature for their foods. They consume few processed foods, and these are of the simplest types. Their diets are heavily oriented to cereal grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. Okay, this is the observation. How do these people live? And there are many, many such people, because the poorest populations, there were many such populations, okay, way back in 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And the observation is their diets are deficient in meat, milk, and eggs. So do you see what the observation is about so many populations? Basically, low intake of animal foods, low intake of oils and sugars, these are macronutrient extracts, and hardly any ultra-processed foods are going on. So if you look at this, as I was showing you earlier in this presentation, it becomes a high fiber diet, okay, because it has whole plant foods. Which ones? Cereal grains, which is whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruit. These are the predominant food groups. So if we do a tightening of the same foods that they were eating, it starts becoming like the whole food plant-based food plate. So in this one, there is zero animal foods and zero oils and sugars and zero processed foods. Okay, so now this is different from what many of these people are eating, but it is not that different. It is kind of a tightening of these knobs that a few of these foods, which they were anyways eating in small quantities, have been removed. Okay, so this is ACLM's whole food plant-based food plate. Okay, but let's see this whole stuff, ACLM came into being in 2004. Okay, and we have needed a lot of studies, a lot of data has to be collected, so that today so many medical organizations have started saying it makes sense, okay, or that we should go in this direction. But it has taken a lot of effort, a lot of studies, thousands of research papers got written. But let's go back in time. In the past, these sources, the concern was that this kind of a food system is deficient in the quality and quantity of protein. Okay, that's the keyword. That there was a concern that this food system does not have enough protein. Okay, so let's see what is this protein thing going on. Okay, today we know that a food plate constructed like this is just fine because they actually say plant proteins. There is no problem with this. Okay, do you see what's going on? There is no problem with this food system. It is certified. ACLM is a lifestyle medicine. It's a specialty in medicine, in mainstream US medicine. Okay, so what has changed? This perception about plant proteins being inferior, this has changed. Okay, and I compared these 3 food plates for you earlier in this presentation. The US, Canada, ACLM, so much of it is in common. Half of it is fruits and vegetables in all 3. 1/4 approximately is grains or whole grains. The dairy part has been changed to water for the Canadian food guide. It's water here. And the protein part, as I told you, in the USDA food system, we have 3 eating patterns, and one of them is healthy vegetarian, and the food guide allows us to pick plant foods for the protein section, and instead of dairy we can use soy. So if we make these 2 choices, then within the framework of the healthy vegetarian food pattern, we get a plant-only food system, and it's been checkmarked as it is okay. They're not saying it is the best or anything. They're saying it is okay, it is acceptable. So there is no concern about being expressed that plant protein is inferior to animal protein. Okay, that concern is gone. Okay. Canadian Food Guide says choose protein foods that come from plants more often. They're actually saying go towards plants more and more. And ACLM basically says plant only. So do you see the interconnections and how our perception has changed in over time as evidence has accumulated that plant protein is actually better? That's how I'm seeing it. Okay. And look at AHA guidelines, American Heart Association 2021. The protein section says mostly protein from plants. They're not saying that animal protein is superior or plant protein is inferior. They're actually saying mostly protein from plants. Do you see? And I walked you through the AICR food guide. Not the food guide, but they have this foods that fight cancer and what is all this stuff, and I analyzed it with you, and it's basically these pictures can be classified into these categories, and they conveniently match the whole food plant-based food plate categories. Do you see what is going on in the world from different perspectives? Cancer perspective, heart disease perspective. And this was the AICR infographic I shared with you. 6 of them say like attenuate something, but the main guideline is whole grains, vegetables, fruits and beans, all plant sources. And they encourage this 1/3 or less, 2/3 or more, and I choose to go for the 1/3 or less and the 2/3 or more. And they encourage this food plate. I walked you through all this data, right? So what has happened is so many organizations have started leading towards plants, and some of them say, yep, plant-based is just fine, or they say make it 100% plants. So it's not that there is widespread agreement on it, but they're all kind of going in this direction. The directionality is what I'm trying to show you. Okay, I showed you American Medical Association, I showed you Kidney International, I showed you some defense agencies like DHA, Defense Health Agency has okayed ACLM's whole food plant-based methodology, and this is the health agency, right? So over the years, after accumulation of evidence, these concerns don't exist anymore. Okay, but let's go back in time and just analyze this, because many of my friends, we all grew up, in I grew up in 70s in India and 80s and 90s. Some of my friends grew up in 60s. Some of my friends have grown up in 90s, and I know some people who were born in like 2000 or so. So all of us, we grew up with this idea that animal protein is essential, right? And let's go a little deeper, because this is like a serious concern people have. Okay, so quantity of protein, the concern is that if you construct a food plate with plants only, like how so many people were doing in subsistence economies or the produce economies, there's a concern they don't have enough protein. The quantity is being questioned. Okay, let's see. This is a plot of macronutrient percentages in India from 1961 to 2013, and Indian food plates have changed a little bit over 40 years, right, or 50 years. So look at the protein percentage. Has the percentage changed? It is in a very tight range. The range is like a 10, 11, 12% protein. Animal protein has increased slightly. Okay, look at the fat changes. The fat versus carb ratio has changed much more. Okay, look at China. What is the protein percentage over a 50-year period? What is going on? It's in a narrow range. The range is like 9 to 13% or something. Okay, this is 80% mark. This is 90% mark. You can see it's almost at the 90% mark. But the fat percentage has changed, especially after 1980 or so. And I got these charts from Our World in Data, which is a respectable source where we can find some charts like this. Okay, let's look at Germany. So I picked Germany because my German friend, who's a close friend, he pointed me to German data. He said, let's look at Germany. I said, okay, let's look at Germany. Look at Germany. Surprising. He was surprised too. It is not obvious to many people that no matter how food plates are being constructed across different countries, across vast periods of time, 50-year time frame, and countries have changed, different ones, the protein percentage doesn't seem to budge from this narrow range of, the total protein is like 10, 11, 12, 13%. 100%, but the fat-carb ratio shows wide variations across populations, okay? And the animal-to-protein ratio shows a lot of variation. Now, Germany has a lot of animal protein going on as compared to plant protein, but India is the other way around, and China is in between the two, okay? Let's look at a few more details, okay? Let's study protein and fat intake in India across, like, how much is this? Like a 40-year time frame, and I got this from a Government of India survey. This is nutrition intake in India 2011-2012. Okay, look at the actual magnitude of protein. It's kind of stable, okay? Rural, urban, it's in this range of 55 to 60 grams, and that's considered adequate. But look at the fat intake. Over the years, the fat intake used to be, it's doubled or something, right? Look at this chart. It's upward growing. Do you see the trend? Okay, let's look at this chart. Okay, what's happening is, in the same nutrition survey, we also have income buckets. So they also measured what are the income levels of people, and they divided all. It's a large survey. I think it's 100,000 people. So we can get some statistical significance for all these buckets too. 12 income buckets. So the lowest income bucket, the calorie intake was around 1,600 or so. Highest income bucket, the calorie intake became 3,200 or so, almost doubled. So, the richest income bucket people are consuming almost twice as much food as the lowest income bucket people. Naturally, they will have more protein also. So the protein intake roughly doubles. Look at this, protein intake doubles. But look at the fat percentage. It quadruples approximately, like 3.5x or something. Okay, let's do something interesting. Same data, but let's plot percentage wise. Okay, now we are talking about food plate composition. Okay, it turns out that it doesn't matter whether we are in the lower income bucket or the highest income bucket. The protein percentage is in a very tight range. It is just 11. It's roughly 10.5, 11.5. It's like 11. Doesn't change. Do you see what's going on? But the fat percentage increases in the highest income buckets. Okay, this was rural and this is urban. The same pattern is observed. But there is a change between rural and urban. This percentage is even worse here, like even less carbohydrates. So the richest people in the urban are following this kind of a system, 61, 28, 11. Okay, you see the trend, what's going on? Okay, interestingly, this data, in this same survey, we also have protein sources. Fascinating, because protein is of concern, right? So protein, they connect where are people getting protein from, okay? Now, the lowest income bucket, they get a lot of protein from cereals. Many of my friends are surprised. Cereals, whole grains have protein, and that's why I made a video. It's called Do Whole Grains Have Protein, in which I go through some of these details, okay? But look at the data. So, but as we get richer and richer in India, the intake of these cereals is going down, but where are we getting our protein from? And so it starts coming from animal foods, which is milk and dairy, and eggs, fish, and meat. So the black and the white are these two sources. A higher and higher percentage is coming from animal foods. That's what I'm trying to show you. As we get richer, we get more. And in between is the pulses, that's kind of constant. This trend is seen among rural and urban areas. Interestingly, the same survey has state-by-state data. So I thought, let me plot Punjab, because I'm Punjabi. Let's see what Punjab. Look at this big white sections here, right? And a little bit of black. A much higher percentage is coming from animal sources, milk and dairy, and you see the trend. So do you see what's going on? So, and just to help people understand, how come we get so much protein from whole grains? Look at the protein percentage in whole grains. The same survey has this chart also. So rice, on an average, now there are so many different rice, but it's like 9.2% protein. Wheat is 14%. And look at these other things, jowar, bajra, maize, barley, 12, 13, 14% protein. So do you see what's going on? The protein percentage, on an average, worldwide, is in a very narrow range, and even whole grains have protein. Okay, anyways. Now what is going on is, many of us have been taught, and in response to the scientific knowledge that we had in the past, that we really should derive protein from animal foods. That it was believed that animal protein is superior. So higher income people started having more dairy, and dairy production in India also went up. For example, this is an interesting scene from this movie called Kohram, and they compare the Amiri ki chai and Garibi ki chai. And Amitabh Bachchan explains, Amiri ki chai has doodh zyada pani kam, which means more milk and less water, and Garibi ki chai, this is a poor people's tea. pani hi pani, it's just water and doodh ki sirf khushbu, which means it just has a flavor of milk. And then he's also showing khade chammach ki chai with a lot of sugar in it. Do you see what's going on? Okay. And you can see at actual data, this is per person milk production kg, it's going up a lot. So on an average, we are having more and more protein from milk, as that data was showing you. And then, ghee ke diye chalana and doodh ki nadiya bahana, these used to be muhavre, like sayings, which remind us that rich people could afford it. Okay. More eggs are being produced in India. You can see this trend. It's majestic. Okay. So I just showed you that this concern in the past about the quantity of protein, has to do with total food intake. It is when people are not consuming enough food is when the quantity falls. But if they just got more food to eat, wouldn't they have gotten enough protein? So do you see, quantitative deficiency is not about food plate composition. It is about not having enough food to eat. Okay, that's the main point I'm trying to share with you. Quality. Okay, this is a very complicated, nuanced subject. The quality of protein, it has to do with the difference between animal protein, plant protein, and it's a very, very complicated subject. There are many ramifications of plant versus animal protein ratio. The amino acid distribution is different. There are things like sulfur compounds, how much sulfur is there, how much methionine is there, does it lead to faster growth in kids, and also the cancerous tissues. There's a lot of details there. Okay, so instead of going through all these details and understanding the subject in such detail, I would suggest just read a little survey by Professor T. Colin Campbell. And instead of the survey, we can choose to trust ACLM that they have done their homework, right? ACLM is American College of Lifestyle Medicine, mainstream specialty within medicine in USA. And they say it is okay. There is no problem with the quality of protein, of plant protein. There is no problem at all. Okay, we don't have to wrap our head around all those technical discussions. It is embedded in the guideline. That's an easier way to make decisions. And I walked you through so many organizations, cancer perspective and diabetes perspective. And what are all these people saying, especially after 2010, in the last 10, 12 years, because a lot of data has collected. And, many people don't know these recent developments that are happening, that plant protein is just fine. There is no problem with plant protein. It's not inferior. Okay. So I just thought I'll share this tidbits with you to shed light on what's going on. So one more piece of graph. It's a fascinating graph. I love this one. The reason I love this one is, if you're familiar with Edward Tufte's work. So Edward Tufte is he's a computer scientist, and he's written this nice book. I think it's called Visual Display of Quantitative Information. And he gives examples of, how you can pack a lot of information in small charts, like compactly. So I like this chart for that reason. It has so much information in a very simple visual. That's what's going on here. So this is a 1962 survey, so many years in the past. And you can see these trends way back in time. Okay, this is not something new that we're discussing. It's been going on, and it's been confirmed over the decades. What is going on? Let's see. So what they did was 85 countries, and a lot of countries were poor, and then there are richer countries. So then they're plotting, this is GDP on a log scale, GDP per year. Okay, so the people get richer, their food plate composition changes. Okay, how does it change? Protein percentage does not budge. Do you see? This is plant proteins, this is animal proteins. So people shift their preference. They start eating more animal protein. But magically, as I was showing you, 2-3 countries I showed you, Germany, China, India, within India, across income buckets, and you can also look at it across states, this percentage does not budge. It's in a very narrow range, no matter how we are constructing our food plates. It's a very cute insight. Okay, so that is what they observed way back in 1962 also. But what changes is, as we are getting richer, more sugar comes into our food. These are refined sugars. And let's look at the left-hand side. What is going on here? These are unseparated animal fats. What are these things? Unseparated means that it's a whole food, like an actual fish, meat, eggs, dairy. Like the fat has not been extracted out. What is extracted? So that is this part, separated edible fats. So the separated ones are things like oil. So that is an extract, or you can make butter or ghee that is extracted from some food, or lard. So those are separated edible fats. And some people call them added fats. Okay. Some people call them visible fats. So there are all these different terms used, but look at the concept. So what happens is, these extra added fats go up animal protein and animal food consumption in general goes up, so we start getting fats from animal protein goes up because we start eating more animal foods. This sugar thing goes up. This sugar and the separated edible fats, both of these are extracts, these are not whole foods. Okay, so this goes up. So if you look at the low income countries, like what are these people doing? Just study what is this. So let's focus here. What is happening here? Look at this margin, about 10% protein intake, right? And most of it is plant foods. Okay, look at this. And what is happening here? Around total fat percentages like 10, 11, 12, maybe in that range. Maybe if you got a little richer, 15% or so, 10 to 15% fat. And where is it coming from? Unseparated vegetable fats. What are these things? These are whole plant foods. Now, trace amounts of fats are found in whole grains and beans also. And a few other things are also being eaten, like a little bit of separated fats, a little bit of animal fats, a little bit of animal protein. Do you see what is going on? Do you see at the bottom what is going on? Now, at the same time, people observed, and they coined this phrase in 1940s, 50s, 60s, kind of just a sketch of an idea. People observed that countries with this kind of food system, the rich countries, had a lot of diseases of affluence. And these poor populations, especially the rural parts of many parts of multiple continents, Asia, Africa, South America, they had low rates of disease of affluence. Okay, so these were called rich people diseases, and there is an association between changing our food plate composition and higher incidence of all these NCDs. And this is kind of a nice infographic going back in 62, which is showing what is going on. Okay, the same things are going on later also. Okay, it's kind of these 3-4 things are written in this article called disease of affluence. These are the dietary changes. These are the 4 things going on. Okay, here's a fascinating little infographic in the same Government of India survey. Let's see what this one is. Now, this is a very narrow time period. This is 93-94 to 2011. So how many years is that? It's like 18 years or so, right? I think we will see a better trend if we can plot 50-year data or 60-year data. So let's say we attempt to plot 1950s to 2020s, that's 70 years. Then the trends will become clearer. But in this narrow range, we do see a few things. And the amazing thing is, what I like about this infographic is, they have these 9 sources of our calories, and it's very elegant. I like the fact that they have these 4 are natural plant foods. And what I love about it is they have separated out roots and tubers as a special one. So if you look at it carefully, the roots and tubers and the veggies and fruits, this is the Kand, Mool, Phal, Phul, Patti Pani system. I'm very fond of this phrase because this is the forest dwellers food system. If you remember what I'm sharing with you earlier in this video. Now this is cereals, and this is pulses, nuts and oilseeds. So these can also be eaten, and this green columns are the foundations of nature cure or naturopathy. Okay, this is what we consume, and these 4 are also the whole food plant-based food plates. That's what we do. Now in this infographic, we also have these yellow ones. This is primarily sugar, and this is primarily oils, right, or fat extracts. So this is those 2 extracts. Most of these is the sugar extract, carbohydrate extracts, and the fat extracts. Then we have animal foods, derived foods, so milk and dairy products, and meat, fish, eggs. So these are the 2. And then there are these misc foods, which could not be classified cleanly into this stuff. So why were we not able to classify? Because, they were all mixed, like processed foods or foods eaten outside or something like that is going on. Okay, so look at the trend in an 18-year time period. So cereal intake, which is those grains, going down, such a clear trend. And I think in this survey, I could not distinguish between whole grains and refined grains. That will also be nice to know how many of these are actually refined grains, how many are whole grains. But it's not obvious from this. But on the whole, grains are going down. What is going up? Let's see. Processed foods and all these misc foods are going up in a substantial way. Oils and fats are going up. Look, 5.3 has become 9, and this is rural versus urban. Milk is going up marginally. Okay, and I think we will see a bigger trend if we look at a 50-year time period. And meat, fish, eggs is going up marginally. Veg and fruit going down marginally. And you can look at the others, they're kind of equal. So you see the trend that's going on. And does it correspond to that disease of affluence thing I've been trying to share with you? So let's look at the last aspect of it, which is diseases of affluence. Is it true that affluence is associated with high fat meals, that a fat percentage goes up. I kind of showed you some data already, but let's look at it again. So the hypothesis is higher income is associated with more fats and less carbohydrates in our food plates. Let's see. So I just showed you this 85 country study from 1962, right? And kind of they showed that total fat intake goes up like this, okay? And the protein percentage kind of remains constant and carbohydrate percentage goes down. It's very clear from this 62 chart. But there is more data available. Okay, this is by Junowski and Popkin, and Professor Popkin from UNC has written papers on the nutrition transition. Okay, this is one of his papers. He has written a few memorable such papers, big picture papers, and very readable. If you're interested in nutrition, they are worth reading and seeing what kind of trends have happened in multiple countries across decade after decade. Fascinating. So here is one chart that caught my attention. Let's see. They're comparing complex carbohydrate percentage of energy and fat percentage of energy, USA versus Asian countries. Okay, and they're comparing it across 75 to 95. It's like a 20-year time period. So what do they see? Look at the fat percentage. So USA is somewhere here, but look at Asia: high income, middle income, low income. So increase. But let's look at just time-wise also, right? Let's say 1985. Look at low income versus middle income versus high income. As income bracket changed, within the same Asia, people are eating more and more fat. Do you see the connection between income and more fats, and across time? What's going on? And now, if we are eating more fats, as I mentioned, we eat less carbohydrates, and especially complex carbohydrates also start going on. So these are like the whole grain kind of thing. Okay, so lower. Okay, so you see the trend. Okay, now 2001. Similar study, 57 countries were studied, and we can see fat percentage, carbohydrate percentage, and protein percentage. You know, as we get richer, we start having a higher fat diet. Okay, and look at the country on the left. They're kind of still at the 15% fat or something. Do you see? 15, 12, 10 kind of a thing. And one way to see this food system is 80-10-10. Okay, 80% carbohydrates, 10% fat, 10% protein, somewhere in that range. Okay. Just an example, oils, is it going up in India? Yes, here is a chart. You know, this is per capita consumption from 4,000. I think you have to look here. So from 4 kg, it has gone up to 10 kg. So it's almost 2.5 times the average per capita consumption. So if you do some calculations, it used to be 5% of calories in 70s. Now 10% of calories have become in 2000. And it's all part of that nutrition transition journey that I'm talking about here. Okay. So disease of affluence, I walked you through 2-3 aspects of it, right? Is there an association of affluence with more processed foods? Looks like, yeah. Is there a positive association between affluence? As we get richer, we eat more animal foods? Yes. And do we gravitate towards higher fat meals? Looks like yes. Okay. So this is the 3 observations I shared with you. Higher income means more fats, less carbohydrates; more processed foods, less natural foods; more animal foods, less plant foods. Okay, these are the 3 trends which have been noted from way back in 1960s across countries, within a country. You know, you see what's going on. So what to do? Okay. Is it true that if we were to reverse all 3 of them, all 3 trends, and adopt a low-fat, whole food, and plant-based food plate construction methodology, is there hope that our disease rates would fall? Is that true? Let's see. So if we were to do the opposite of this trend, that higher income we eat more fats, but let's consciously eat low fat. Okay, and with higher income, let's consciously eat low food, and with higher income, let's consciously eat plant-based. So is it true that if we do this stuff, low fat, whole food, plant-based, is that good? Does it work? Okay. Now, what I showed you is a lot of observational studies, right? And just general sketch of an idea that, for example, Wikipedia says, you know, those trends exist, the disease of affluence exist. But is there an interventional study? Because interventional studies are pretty motivating and powerful, that somebody adopted these food guidelines and it worked. So, okay, let's see. First of all, there are too many health problems. Okay, there are so many conditions. There are so many cancers. There are GI tract conditions. There are so many autoimmune conditions. Okay, there are these metabolic conditions. Okay, there are many of them. So ideally, in order to validate that interventional studies, some people, let's say they have gallstones or they have heart disease, and then we say, please follow this food guidelines, and then do we see changes in health markers with these intervention? And how long do we have to do it? Like a week or two? Or do we have to do it for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? The longer we do, the better our confidence that it makes sense and that disease did not progress or was arrested or reversed. We need to do long-term studies. But there are so many health conditions and we need long-term studies. It's a lot of work, a lot of money has to be spent to study each and every condition. Now, interestingly, these observations have existed since 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and that's why that disease of affluence concept has been around. It's in research papers, okay? They are called Western diseases, Western lifestyle. It's all common knowledge in lots of institutions. But nobody had done interventional studies lasting multiple years, okay? So luckily, these studies got done, okay? So we have a few such studies. But a lot of these studies have not been done because money is not available to do all these studies, okay? But a few of them exist. And here is the heart disease big picture, which brings me joy, that heart disease is the #1 killer of men and women in the world. There exist some parts of the world where it just does not exist, okay? And these places tend to be rural and so-called primitive. Not all, but many of them are rural and primitive. Can we copy these populations to drop our heart disease rates to almost zero? Is that true? So yes, those interventional studies got done. We just have to eat like them. That's the only thing we need. And Esselstyn's study, and there is also Ornish and Barnard, but let's just focus on Esselstyn's study because that has the best results and very jaw-dropping results. And he has started saying heart disease is a food-borne disease. Okay, let's see what this is. Okay, now let's study Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's interventional studies, which bring me a lot of joy, okay? And he says heart disease is a food-borne illness. He actually did the interventional studies that, should have been done with all these observations that exist at a high level, known to people since 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So what did he do? Okay, finally, a study got done and interventional studies by him. So who is Dr. Esselstyn? He's a former heart surgeon from a Cleveland clinic. Actually, he won a gold medal in rowing in Sydney Olympics as part of a team in 1952. He's also an Olympic medalist, and he has this book in which he explains a lot. And there's a beautiful TED talk which I encourage all my friends to watch. And I got inspired by his TED talk. Okay, so he did a pilot study in 1985, small study, and then he did a bigger study. Let's look at the nature of the first one. 24 patients, and then he published a 5-year follow-up and a 12-year follow-up. Okay. So there were, so who are these people, right? So think of it this way. So the kind of food system that we're talking about, it has no animal products, it has no oils, it has no sugars, amazing, no processed foods, no ultra-processed foods. And Esselstyn introduced a few more things, okay, like eat leafy greens often, and then he has like no coffee. So he has a very difficult food system to follow from the perspective of what many of us normally eat. Now this study is in USA. Now imagine in 1985, who would agree to do a multi-year study like this, going to even 1 year, even 3 months? Who would agree to follow such a food system? Somebody who's very sick, okay? Somebody who's been given up by medicine, like there is no hope left, okay? So the people that he found who agreed to follow what he was saying were people with serious heart disease. So he found them, and then he kept in touch with them. He kept guiding them. Among the 24 patients who joined, 6 were non-adherent. So they could not follow the guidelines he had in mind. And, in this 12-year period, they had 13 new cardiac events. Okay. 18 patients were adherent. And then he has a 5-year follow-up. But let's see, 12-year follow-up, right? What happened over 12 years? Adherent patients, and there were 17 of the, 17 of the 18, if I remember correctly. But the adherent ones have no extension of clinical disease, like the disease did not progress, no coronary events, and no interventions. What he's saying is, so let's see, prior to these 12 years, these 18 participants experienced 49 coronary events in the 8 years before the study. And after they switched to Esselstyn's dietary intervention, they just stopped. No coronary events, nothing. So coronary events are like death, stroke, heart disease, or not heart disease, heart attacks, and then visiting the emergency room for something serious has happened which is heart related. Those things just stopped. Okay, so it's a miraculous result that he demonstrated in a very small study. And so some people got inspired by just this pilot study that, wow, there is some magic in what he's saying. Okay, but luckily, and some people used to ask him questions, and I've borrowed a bunch of these from his TED talk. Okay, and then people said, do you have visual evidence that the disease reversed? And he says, yeah, in some patients it happened, not in every patient. But cholesterol numbers and calcification and how the arteries look, these are not the relevant clinical endpoints. Okay, the most important clinical endpoint, the most important thing we should care for is, did these people die? Did they have long life? Were they having heart attacks? No. So those clinical endpoints, they all went away. That is the most important thing. Okay. Now, he had a follow-up study. This is a bigger study, 198 patients, and he published in 2014. 119 of them had undergone a prior coronary intervention with stents or bypass surgery. 44 had had a previous heart attack, and diabetes is going on in some patients, obesity, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia. So these are all the comorbidities. So you get an idea of the cohort, what this looks like. It's a 4-year follow-up. 177 people were adherent. They followed his guidelines. 21 were non-adherent. In those who were non-adherent, 13, and he says 62%, experienced an adverse event. What is adverse event? Let's see. Among the people who followed his guidelines, 177, 176 out of them, which is 99.4% of them who adhered, avoided any major cardiac event, including heart attack, stroke, and death. So none of them died. There is no heart attack, no stroke, but in the non-adherent, a lot of them were experiencing it. And this is what usually happens. Okay, so from that standpoint, these people stopped having any symptoms of the disease. Like, angina improved or resolved in 93% of them. Okay, and here's a summary of the two, if somebody wants to see it together. This is the first study, this is the second study. And that's why he started saying coronary artery disease is the leading killer of men and women, in the Western civilization. Yet the truth be known that it's nothing more than a toothless paper tiger that need never exist. And if it does, it need not ever progress. He says it's a food-borne illness on the basis of that result that 99.4% of populations of the people who are adherent in a 4-year follow-up stopped having heart attacks and deaths and strokes. All these major cardiac events stopped. Okay, it's a remarkable result in cardiology. I wish many people knew this, and it brings me excitement because we have a lot of heart disease in India. India is too much heart disease. Okay, so for example, one way to see it is if you look at over 27 years, the NCDs are going up. NCDs are non-communicable diseases, and cardiovascular disease is a big one. And 50% of NCDs are cardiovascular, and that ischemic heart disease, that atherosclerosis driven, the ones in which we die in heart attacks. Okay, that's a big one. Okay, so it leads to a lot of deaths. Now, this is Punjab, a lot of deaths due to heart disease. And among Asian Indians, these are people who have come from India, are in USA. Among women, 28% of deaths. Among men, 31% of deaths. So many deaths are due to heart disease. So, and there are some more morbid statistics. The Asian Indians, again, these are people from India who live in USA. As compared to the US national average, the heart disease rates coronary artery disease rates are 3 times higher. Hospitalization 4 times higher. So every statistic just looks worse. Okay, it's a very serious disease. So much incidence. And is there hope for the Indian population that the same protocol that Esselstyn has shown will work? Now, ideally, we should replicate his study on Asian Indians or in India, in 20 different parts of India, so that we have a very good idea that, yeah, it works everywhere. We don't have those studies today. But the best available evidence till date is Esselstyn's interventional study. I think it will work, but we can't be sure unless we actually do the trial. So if somebody is watching this video and you are some billionaire or you have billionaire friends, my humble request, it's like a genuine request, please allocate money and get this studies done. I think the study can be done in California, for example. There is a very high Asian Indian population. It's fairly diverse. I think it can be done. People are aware that Esselstyn's study exists. People, I think, will be willing to follow it for 5 years. Just measure, see what happens. I think the study should be done in India because India is kind of diverse. It's a very large country. Imagine 200 people in 20 different parts. It's how many? 4,000 people. Now we need to train people to track them, help them. So we need some infrastructure and like a 4-year follow-up. It requires some work and money. If this were done, and we start getting results comparable to Esselstyn, or even if it's not as perfect as Esselstyn's results, if you can demonstrate 90% cases went away. Okay, it's much less than 99.4 as Esselstyn saw. It's amazing. 90% cases went away. We really should do these studies. Please. Okay, it's amazing. Okay, so this section is what do I eat? Okay, I'll just briefly mention, based on all these evidences that I have presented, different aspects. So I gravitated towards these whole food plant-based food plates. And, on the left-hand side is fruits and vegetables. This is, you can see it as a big salad, and I love to call it Kandmul Phalphul Patipani. This is the ancient forest dwellers' food system. Like the spiritual people used to go and live in forests and subsist on this. So this is kind of, in the modern language, a big salad. And if you want to go deeper into nutrition, you can keep studying it. It's fascinating. There are tubers and leafy greens and berries and cruciferous and alliums and mushrooms and citrus and herbs and spices. There are details for each one. It's an elegant subject if somebody wants to know, and we can compose elegant salads with a lot of this stuff and make them beautiful. You can go to my Instagram account and you can see what I do. All those rainbow colored salads. The right hand side, as I said, is dal chawal. Now, it's not literally chawal. I'm using it as a placeholder. Dal is grains, beans. Dal is basically beans, peas, legumes, or pulses, and chawal is a placeholder. It's any combination of whole grain, so any whole grain and this thing, okay? And you can add a few nuts and seeds, especially flax and chia. Now, I'll cover all these details in some other video. Why flax and chia, and do we really need them? Okay, all these are advanced questions, but you get the idea. Dal chawal plus big salad, and we really need a big salad. Eat the salad before the dal chawal, okay? And we need B12, okay? What we do is eat plants in their whole form. The whole word is very important. No meat, no fish, no eggs, no dairy. There is no milk, no ghee, no yogurt, no animal foods in my food plates. There is no oil. These two are macronutrient extracts. No oil, no sugar. We can use dates and date sugar and date syrup, and kind of the oil substitute is nuts and seeds. You'll get the flavor. You have to make your food and see what happens in terms of our culinary requirements and taste buds. It works. Okay, low or no salt. No salt is very hard to change, and there is no good substitute. So we really have to go after it, that I'm committed, I will do no salt. And there's a way to make no salt by amplifying these herbs and spices and berries, and it works. And if you go to low salt, we have to ensure iodine sufficiency. That's kind of a nuanced guideline. And I follow a low-fat guideline, very important guideline. I think many people who follow whole food plant-based don't recognize the value of this low-fat guideline. It's very important. 10%, and these days I'm thinking maybe even less than 10. I'm kind of exploring these options. So this is a system I follow. And let's just do a recap of what I shared with you. I went through like 30 different organizations. What do they say? And I converged to this low-fat, whole food, plant-based guideline. I showed you different perspectives, the inflammation angle, and the heart disease angle, and the cancer angle. And amazingly, we have this food system in India called Naturopathy or Nature Cure, which Gandhi used to love a lot. It's protected and promoted by Ayush Ministry, Government of India. And these two food systems look the same to me. They are similar in terms of the broad guidelines. Supremely fiber-rich, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, healthy heart guidelines. So many different things are going on in the same food system. And this is the food system that was followed by, the subsistence economies, or the lower economic groups in many parts of the world. A few of them are well documented, and we revere them in nutrition circles as populations with amazingly low NCD rates, and some of them have zero heart disease. And so based on those observations, we can draw inspiration from those rural populations, like what were they eating, and we can mimic them in the modern world while living a modern life. And Esselstyn has shown that it works for heart disease. Okay, so if somebody wants to get started, here are a few starting points for Nature Cure if you want to approach the subject from that perspective. And once again, I follow the low-fat guideline inspired by these pieces of work. And I'm collecting a bunch of articles, interesting ones, at thankfultoplants.com. In case you like this really long presentation, please like and subscribe and share this video with others. Thank you so much.